Off the coast of the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides lays a small uninhabited island, officially abandoned since the highland clearances of the 1800s. The cursed island has been the subject of legends and ghostly tales for centuries, which is part of the reason why locals give it a wide berth. But more significant is the Ministry of Defense exclusion order, which has been enforced for the past 80 years. Officially, this prohibition is due to the controversial testing of biological and chemical weapons in the area during the early 1950s, the residual effects of which are said to still pollute the abandoned isle's soil, posing a risk to anyone who would dare set foot upon its shores. This would be reason enough to avoid the area, but even darker rumors have persisted over the years. A metaphorical black cloud which has hanged over the island for decades, and a hellish banshee-like wail which can be heard at night, carried by cold winds. These dark tales might well have remained as rumors had it not been for the uncovering of new evidence in recent years. The document that follows is published here in its entirety for the first time, having been leaked by a disgruntled MOD official who discovered it buried in Whitehall's deepest archive. The author is Philip Redford, a former soldier and Home Office official who went missing without a trace during the autumn of 1946. If his account is true, it could well redefine our understanding of the 20th century history and indeed prove the existence of a link between the mortal and immortal realms. We will let the readers come to their own conclusions. November 10th, 1946. I arrived on the island shortly before dusk, the motorboat crew taking advantage of the window between storms to bring me ashore. With me came fresh supplies for the men already deployed, and I would hope some renewed hope for their beleaguered spirits. It's difficult for me to describe my emotions as our boat approached the concrete jetty on the desolate shoreline. Yes, I found my way across Western Europe during the final days of the war, and I thought nothing could scare me after witnessing the horrors of Hitler's collapsing regime. But I experienced a cold foreboding as I set my eyes upon the lonely island for the first time. The raw terror wasn't the same as I'd felt when facing the opposing German soldiers and their MG-42s and 88 guns. It was more subtle than that, almost primal. But my feelings were surely nonsensical. I've heard the ghost stories, of course, but that's surely all they are. Stories. The prisoner held on the island has become infamous in tight government circles, but is practically unknown to the outside world. But, as evil as the war criminal is, I'm certain he is nothing more than a wicked man. This is the purpose of my visit: to interview the secret prisoner and ascertain whether he is fit to stand trial. The apprehension I felt as I set foot upon the jetty was soon abated as I was greeted by an old comrade and friend. Captain Jack Sinclair is my contact on the island, tasked with supporting me during my stay and facilitating my interview with the prisoner. Jack and I fought side by side during the crossing of the Rhine in '45. He saved my life when we were pinned down by a German machine gun. This I'll never forget. We warmly embraced upon the wind and rain-swept pier before he rushed me inside of the underground bunker at the island's center. This isle has been uninhabited since the early 1800s, but the bunker was constructed by sappers in 1940. It was intended for the base to be used by a Home Guard auxiliary unit in case the mainland was invaded by the opposing faction, the Axis powers. Thankfully, this purpose was never realized, but the nature of the secure and isolated location makes it perfect for the detention of our secret prisoner. Jack is deployed on the island with a 4-man security team. The troops wear khaki uniforms without any insignia or regimental caps. They rarely speak, but have the look of hardened veterans, dogs of war prepared for any eventuality. The small force is commanded by Sergeant McIntosh. He's got dead eyes and a deep scar across his left cheek. His men are Privates Bell, Clifton, and Jones. They provide around-the-clock security with 2 on and 2 off. The accommodation inside the bunker is cramped and basic. I haven't stayed in such discomfort since the war. Luckily, Jack was able to provide some home comfort in the form of a bottle of single malt. We drank throughout the evening inside the bunker's small canteen, sitting under the dim electric light of the generators while sheltered from the harsh elements outside. Our reunion was well overdue, and I enjoyed reminiscing over old times. But the conversation took a darker tone once I asked about the prisoner. It's not so much what Jack said, but more what he didn't say. My friend refused to be drawn into a discussion regarding the detainee's origins, his true identity, or the horrific crimes he's accused of. Jack simply shook his head, draining his glass and telling me our interview would begin tomorrow morning. I'll admit to being confused and disconcerted by Jack's evasion. I write this entry while lying on my hard bunk, and I can't help but feel apprehensive at what is to come. Nevertheless, I have a job to do, and I will conduct the prisoner's interview with professionalism expected from His Majesty's Civil Service. November 11th, 1946. A minute's silence was held on the 11th hour in honor of our dead brothers. Those brave men who made the ultimate sacrifice should have been at the forefront of my thoughts. But instead, during that solemn silence, my only thoughts were of the monster locked up only a few yards away. My morning didn't start well. I had a little rest the night before. My bunk was rock hard and the room icy cold. But this wasn't the reason for my lack of sleep. Because my subconscious was assaulted by a series of vivid nightmares, taking me back to the horrors of the war. The bullets, the shells, and the bodies piled up like firewood in those hellish camps. Sadly, these dark dreams are all too familiar, although it's been months since they've been so severe. But worse were the terrifying visions I had of the monster at the end of the corridor. In my nightmare, he took on an inhuman and diabolical form, one of pure malice and unprecedented evil. When morning finally came, I struggled through breakfast and coffee, barely able to focus as Jack delivered his briefing. I didn't want to walk down that corridor and face the monster. Every instinct in my body told me not to do so, but I forced myself to walk forward, as I didn't wish to show weakness in front of the men. The interrogation room was divided into two, with Jack and I on one side with the door to the external corridor behind us. We were separated from the prisoner by a wall of reinforced glass, with microphones connected to speakers for two-way communication. Jack explained that this was a necessary precaution because the prisoner had killed 3 squatties during his arrest in Hamburg. I didn't know quite what to expect when I first laid eyes on the prisoner through that thick layer of glass. I suppose I'd built up an image in my head, reinforced by the nightmares and the fearful words of Jack's briefing. But when he entered the interrogation room and sat before us, I was surprised by how unremarkable the man looked. In fact, he was bordering on the pathetic, taking the appearance of a broken, aging man with wrinkled skin, gray hair, and sunken eyes. He wore an itchy gray prisoner's uniform, which only added to his reduced status, and he sat down upon the hard metal chair, appearing submissive and defeated as he waited for the questioning to begin. I started to reassure myself, believing I'd fallen for the ghost stories which had been doing the rounds at Whitehall for the last few weeks. Surely it was all superstitious nonsense, I told myself. The prisoner before me was no more than a broken remnant of a fallen evil empire. Surely he no longer posed any threat, and the only task remaining was to deliver justice for his many horrendous crimes. An ominous moment of silence followed before Jack coolly made the necessary introductions while speaking through the microphone. Herr Fisher, I would like to introduce Philip Redford, a representative of His Majesty's government. He has come here to ask you a series of questions. I recommend that you cooperate because Mr. Redford's report will be assessed by the Home Secretary who will determine your ultimate fate. There was another pause before Fisher spoke for the first time through his own microphone. Very well. He cut it there and had nothing further to say, at least for the time being. I carefully watched his facial expressions and body language, expecting to see some signs of stress or anxiety. After all, Air Fisher may well end up with a noose around his neck, and he will surely hang if he ever faces trial. Given the enormity of his crimes against humanity, I did hope to see some remorse in the aging man's eyes. Or, failing that, a realization that he would now face consequences for his heinous actions. But sadly, I was disappointed, because when I looked to the German's wrinkled face, all I saw were cold and emotionless eyes. I took a deep breath, composing myself as I retrieved the notes from my briefcase and began my questioning. So, Air Fisher, we have had some difficulty in tracing your family history. Yes, Fisher stated without elaborating. I realized I would need to work hard to get any information from the prisoner. Fisher was not your original name, was it? And Hans is not your true Christian name? I have had many names over the years, but none of them Christian. I'll confess to raising my eyebrow in surprise before casting Jack a look. My companion simply shook his head. I decided upon a change of tack, realizing this line of questioning was getting me nowhere. Air Fisher, the earliest records we have on you date from 1929, when you became a member of the National Socialist Party in Munich. In a short period, you rose up the ranks of the Nazi Party and became a close advisor and confidant to Adolf Hitler. You remained in the shadows for the next 16 years. Nevertheless, you were instrumental in Hitler's rise to power and his subsequent policies, including the worst excesses of the Nazi regime during the war. My statement drew little reaction from Fisher, other than a firm nod and a flippant response. So, what is your question, Mr. Redford? You don't deny the accusations against you, then? I asked impatiently. I do not, Fisher confirmed without emotion. His non-denial of the charges only added to my confusion. I'm afraid you don't understand, Air Fisher. Your co-conspirators are mostly dead and buried. They either died in the late stages of the war, or were executed by the hangman's noose. You alone have been brought here in secret, held without a trial due to the unique circumstances of your capture, and the frankly outlandish claims you made immediately after your arrest. Your so-called Führer is long dead, and just following orders is not considered a legitimate defense. Fisher interrupted my speech by laughing through the microphone, emitting a chilling, loud cackle before eventually answering in a mocking tone. Oh, I have always followed orders from my master. But not that fool, Hitler. I answer to an older and much more powerful entity. One day my master will rise and burn this wretched world of yours in unholy fire. Until that day comes, I will serve his cause in your realm, using whatever means and methods to inflict pain, mayhem, and suffering. I was left flabbergasted in that moment, looking to Jack for reassurance but finding none. I had little choice but to continue the interview. Well, Air Fisher, this brings us to the crux of the matter. These claims you made after your arrest? I glanced down at my notes, confirming that I had it right. You say you are not a German citizen, that in fact you're not a man at all. You claim to be a supernatural entity not of this world. I laughed nervously, but was only met by a cold stare from Jack and a stern confirmation from Fisher. Yes, that is correct. I shook my head in contempt. This is absurd, I exclaimed. Fisher's response was one of barely concealed anger, as his previously cold eyes lit up with a fiery and frightening intensity. Absurd, you say? Absurd, you damn fool! If you had witnessed what I have, the crucifixion of Christ, the rampage of the Golden Horde, The innocents gasped by the thousands, their bodies burnt in ovens. Oh, I've seen it all, Mr. Redford. Believe me. I was taken aback by Fisher's outburst. I'll admit to being intimidated despite the glass barrier between me and the prisoner, but I was determined not to show the monster any fear. You're quite the storyteller, Herr Fisher. But what evidence do you have to back up your outlandish claims? How can you prove that you're anything more than a desperate man seeking to escape justice for his heinous crimes? Fisher laughed again, a deeper and frankly inhuman bellowing which shot through the speakers. Proof is what you seek. How is this for starters? Fisher raised his bony hands up from the metal table before him, and when he did so, the lights in the room flickered for a few seconds, and then went out entirely, leaving us in total darkness. I gasped in shock and called out to Jack. Thankfully, the power outage only lasted for a few seconds before the lights inside the bunker suddenly shot back on. But the worst shock was still to come, as I looked through the glass and saw what Fisher had become. His previously human eyes now replaced by jet black orbs, and his lips curled into a sadistic grin that was anything but friendly. My jaw dropped as I jumped up from my chair in shock, but thankfully Jack took charge, exclaiming, "This interview is over." He promptly grabbed hold of me as we made for the steel door, Jack slamming it shut behind us. A frantic conversation followed on the far side of the door. I challenged my old friend on what we'd just encountered. Naturally, I was in a state of denial and seeking to rationalize the unsettling incident. Parlor tricks. The lights in the eyes. Nothing but damn parlor tricks, I exclaimed. Don't you believe it? Jack answered coldly. The lights are not even the half of it. There's been all kinds of unexplainable events on the island in recent weeks. Dead animals washed up on the beach, hoof prints in the mud, disembodied voices down here in the bunker, and that's not to mention the nightmares. I experienced a jolt of fear at that last statement, and Jack picked it up. You've had the dreams then? Trust me, Philip, they only get worse the longer you stay here. There's a reason why McIntosh and his men never talk. I could barely believe what I was hearing. You actually believe what he says? I asked nervously. I don't know what to believe, Jack replied with a shake of his head. But listen to me, Philip. We can't stay on the island for much longer. He pointed fearfully back towards the interrogation room door. Whatever that monster is, he's getting stronger by the day. You need to get your damn report done so we can all get the hell out. More drink will be had this evening, I'm sure of it. I hope I'm granted some rest during the twilight hours, because the interview begins afresh tomorrow morning. November 12th, 1946. This morning has passed by in a nightmarish blur, and I am barely able to distinguish between the dream world and what passes for reality in this hellish bunker. It's hard to describe what assaulted me during the twilight hours. It seems the beast which dwells inside this subterranean layer can infiltrate a man's subconscious at will, bringing his worst fears to life and playing on his darkest impulses. I've only been here 2 days, but I can tell our situation is rapidly deteriorating. Jack tells me that Fisher's power have increased exponentially since my arrival, and he doubts we can hold him here for much longer. Jack begged me to call Whitehall and pull the plug on this entire operation. I was severely tempted to do so, but first I needed to know the truth. I went back into the interrogation room at dawn despite Jack's strong objections. McIntosh stood at the door holding a silent vigil with his Sten gun in hand, his eyes dead and almost devoid of human emotion. Fisher's eyes had returned to normal, and there were no tricks with the lights during that session. Still, I couldn't help but detect the smugness in Fisher's thin face as he greeted me from behind the glass. I no longer doubted his claims. Not really. The awful visions which invaded my exhausted mind have surely confirmed his terrible power. But still, I didn't fully understand. Or perhaps I just needed confirmation of my worst fears. You're not a man? I asked softly, barely able to hold his monstrous gaze. I am not. "What is your true name?" was my next question, spoken down the microphone through trembling lips. The monster's sick grin widened and his voice deepened as he replied, "I have gone by many names over the centuries, but you may call me Abaddon." A chill went up my spine and a cold sweat ran down my brow. You speak of a master that you serve. Who is this individual?" Abaddon scoffed, anger entering his voice as he spat out his reply. "You know very well who I serve. You've always known. You men of the modern age attempt to deny his existence. But my master lives on, and his influence is as strong as ever." I took a deep breath before asking my next question. "You speak of influence. We know you worked alongside Hitler and his Nazis during the war. You claim there's been other tyrants throughout history. If what you say is true, this means you're responsible for corrupting the hearts of men. You and your master forced them to commit crimes of unspeakable evil." "No. Certainly, I have used my master's influence to push human history in a certain direction. But in truth, there is little effort required. The true darkness dwells within the hearts of men. War, conquest, annihilation. These are the acts of mere mortals. The cruelty and savagery are all yours." My heart sank in that moment as the terrible truth hit home. I felt physically unwell and couldn't bear to stay in the room a moment longer. I have to put in a call to Lewis requesting a boat to evacuate us from the island. They'll send relief as soon as the weather permits. Right now, I can hear the heavy rain and wind pouring against the concrete walls. But the storm is nothing compared to the horror barely contained within this godforsaken bunker. We must get off this island before it's too late. November 12, 1946. Afternoon. This may well be my last entry as I write with a shaking hand, fighting back the pain. The end came so quickly, and not in the way we expected. A burst of automatic gunfire abruptly woke me from my midday slumber. My instincts kicked in as I jumped up from my bunk and reached for a weapon I didn't have. There were further gunshots and screams from the corridors before Jack rushed in, his service revolver drawn and a wild look in his eyes. "Philip, on your feet, lad!" he shouted. "Well, what the hell is going on?" I asked frantically. "It's McIntosh! He's lost the bloody plot!" We barged out into the corridor, only to find our path blocked by the crazed sergeant, blood on his shirt and his barrel smoking as he reloaded his Sten gun. "Quick, get to the interrogation room and lock yourself in," Jack ordered. I obeyed my friend's instructions, looking back in time to see Jack cut down by a burst of gunfire. As for me, I made it to the interrogation room but failed to get the door shut before a bullet struck me in the leg. I fell screaming in agony as I collapsed to the concrete floor. I expected McIntosh to finish the job, but instead the sergeant ignored me, making his way to the second doorway which led to Abaddon's cell. I tried to call out, but the breath had left my lungs, and there was nothing I could do as the possessed McIntosh inserted the keys and opened the heavy steel door. Once the cell door was open, McIntosh dropped to his knees and bowed his head as if in prayer. And then, Abaddon walked out and stood over him. I lay powerless on the blood-soaked floor looking up at the monster, whose eyes were once again jet black. His hand was now more akin to a claw, which he placed upon McIntosh's exposed head, forming a tight grip on the sergeant's skull before twisting and breaking the sergeant's neck like a twig. McIntosh's lifeless body collapsed in a heap, and Abaddon turned his attention towards me, fixating his black, shark-like eyes upon me while he grinned to reveal rows of long, sharp fangs. I froze in fear, feeling sure the demon would dispatch me next. I silently recited the Lord's Prayer and prepared for the end, but for whatever nefarious reason, the demon spared me, although he emitted a hellish, banshee-like wail which filled the bunker and brought terror to my heart. Abaddon was more beast than man now, and he was a prisoner no longer. Stepping over my limp body, the demon advanced down the corridor and ascended to the surface, crying out in frightful glee at his sudden freedom. It's been quiet for some time now. I've managed to stem the loss of blood from my wound and believe I can escape this bunker-turned-tomb. I have no choice, because I'm the only one left. If I can make it to the jetty, I can still reach the boat and make it off this godforsaken rock. As for Abaddon Fisher, or whoever that monster really is, he can stay here and rot for all I care. Philip Redford's journal was recovered from his body by the relief team. He was found dead on the jetty, just yards from the water. The landing party noted how his face was drained of blood and his jaw was pried open in a silent scream. The boat's captain saw a dark figure observing them from a hillside overlooking the harbor. The unidentified individual disappeared from sight when challenged, but all the crew heard were animal-like roars from the island's interior. Lots were drawn, and one man was sent to check inside the bunker for survivors. He never returned to the boat. Facing a potential mutiny, the captain was forced to abandon the relief mission and return to the mainland. The British military have not made any attempt to return to the island since the 40s. There have been sporadic incidents over the years. The locals continue to avoid the region but speak of hellish wails emanating from the island's shores, and hundreds of dead fish and birds inexplicably washing up on shore. In 1972, a fishing trawler was blown off course by stormy weather and struck rocks close to the island. The crew are said to have made it to the beach, but there was no rescue attempt, and none were ever seen again. Occasionally, a disturbed individual or cultist will ignore all warnings and set sail for the location. Most are caught by patrol boats before they reach the island, but some make it to shore and presumably find whatever dark force they were seeking. The MOD whistleblower who released Philip Redford's journal likely had good intentions. But in this instance, we believe the government are justified in isolating the island and trapping whatever entity which dwells upon it. You'll notice that we haven't released the name of the island, and we would strongly discourage anyone from attempting to find it. The isle is cursed for good reason, and the evil trapped upon its god-forsaken shores should remain there until the end of time. Jonathan was fascinated by magic. For as long as he could recall, it was something that undoubtedly enthralled him. Perhaps it was the enigmatic nature that drew him towards it. He remembered witnessing his first act of wonder on the streets when an old man had a random woman select a card from a deck. He could still recollect the old man's appearance. He had pale skin veneered with a river of frozen ripples across his face. His cheeks sagged to his chin as if pocketing small bundles of change. His eyebrows were white and bushy, veiling his eyes while complementing his dense mustache. He wore a classy suit, featuring a tasteful vest beneath. A golden chain looped precariously from his vest, disappearing behind the flap of his jacket. On his head, he had a top hat which added to his already towering height. The woman appeared rather extravagant herself, donning a quite lavishing red dress with a brown fur coat, her brunette hair resting comfortably upon the fleecy collar. Even in the heels she sported, she barely measured up to the old man's chest. He had her gaze upon the card before returning it to its home in the deck, shuffling them while he entertained the audience with an array of phrases, gaining their laughter in return. After the cards had received enough attention, he fanned them out in a smooth and yet swift motion. Every card held their red backsides to the audience, all but one. In the heart of the arched row of cards poked a white tip of one rebellious one. At that moment there, everyone, including Jonathan, had gasped. The old man asked the woman to retrieve the card. As she did, he inquired if that was the card she had selected, and regardless, right or wrong, he would later tell her something about the card she was removing. The woman procured the card, staring at it before slowly shaking her head in discontent. Jonathan remembered how he felt at that moment. He felt sorry for the old man and held his head down in dismay. However, the old man wasn't finished. He simply shrugged his shoulders feebly before asking the woman why she had taken 2 cards from him. Confused, the woman argued back that she hadn't. Yet the old man pressed on, ensuring that she in fact had taken 2 cards and that one was in her coat pocket. She was hesitant, but slowly she placed her hand in her pocket and immediately her eyes lit up. Jonathan's lit up as well, unable to gauge the possibility of the old man's act. The woman removed her hand from her coat pocket, and to everyone's amazement, a card was in it. The man once again asked if the card she now held, the 2 of diamonds, was the card she had selected. With quivering hands, she was speechless, simply nodding, producing an extended smile and showcasing everyone the card. Everyone around applauded, but the old man held up his hands to gesture silence. He notified everyone that he had vowed to inform the woman something about the first card she had selected. He asked her if the first card had been her original choice before selecting the second one. She was speechless again, holding one hand to her mouth. After a few seconds, she claimed that it was, but that it was something she had decided in her thoughts. It was at that moment the crowd burst into a thunderous applause, even louder than before. The old man's lips curled into a satisfied smile, and he issued a long, leisure bow. After that day, Jonathan was forever instilled with captivation. From then on, he recognized that a magician is what he wanted to become. Jonathan witnessed that act 3 years. From that moment on, card tricks were the tool he toiled with, anxious to create a routine of his own that would have crowds applauding in amazement. Of course, this was all a pipe dream, if anything. He lived with his mother in a rather run-down part of the city. His father had passed some years ago when he was too young to remember. His mother had claimed that he died from stress, of working so hard at the shoe factory, barely keeping their heads above water to make ends meet. They were just shy from being dirt poor, and with his father gone, the weight of that burden now resided on his mother, who worked long-hour shifts. Jonathan tried to pull his own weight to assist his mother, functioning as a paper route boy. Every morning, well beyond even the slightest glimmer of light, he would wake up to meet his boss, Mr. Garrett, at a stand down the corner. Mr. Garrett, who was a rather impatient, pudgy fellow, was reluctant to hire the boy at first, but caved after Jonathan proved his worth by working the first few shifts free of charge. Jonathan was hard working at his job, often finishing earlier than Mr. Garrett's past employees. Because of such, the man barely had anything to say against the boy. So when Jonathan went on again about the headline on the papers about the great Occam Cobb, he indulged the boy.
"Mr. Garrett, it's him again!"
he exclaimed excitedly. Mr. Garrett was lazily fanning through one of the papers. He was an objectively large man and always seemed to have a frown pressed across his lips. One of his hefty fingers rubbed his brow after correcting the cabbie hat on his head. Afterwards, he lugged his attention from the paper he was reading.
"What's that?"
he asked in a monotone voice.
"It's him, the great Occam Cobb,"
Jonathan answered, giving the name his best announcer voice. Mr. Garrett sniffed briskly before returning his attention to the paper.
"Oh, that coot, huh? Is he still at it?"
"At it? He's the greatest magician in the world, and it says he'll be performing here all week starting next week."
Mr. Garrett was silent, turning the pages nonchalantly.
"Mr. Garrett, did you hear what I said? He's coming here,"
Jonathan repeated in a voice even more excited than before. The elevation in his voice seemed to startle the man, as if pulling him out of a trance.
"That's great, kid,"
he said without looking up, the top of his hat bobbed from nodding.
"It's fantastic,"
Jonathan replied, staring wide-eyed at the black and white photo depicting a man. He was rather young, with black hair combed and greased to the side, complementing his classy suit. One hand rested just under his chin, with fingers curling around it while an eyebrow was raised. His other hand, poked from under his arm, clamped tight to a wand. His entire expression seemed as though he was peering deep into Jonathan's eyes, almost inquiring him if what he would see was genuine magic or deception. Occam Cobb was Jonathan's favorite magician, or perhaps idol was a better word for it. Although he had never attended a show of the man, the rumors of his talents and reputation were enough to fuel his imagination of what the man could do. He heard nothing less than Occam Cobb was a true magician of the ages, or Occam defies the laws of physics, or his favorite, the great Occam Cobb has surpassed all his predecessors, creating a new genre of magic. Of course, these were all headlines on the newspapers, but even the words from people were no different. Regardless, Occam Cobb was coming to his city to perform. The thought alone sent a spark of vigor through Jonathan's body. He immediately dug in his pocket to pull out a beaten set of playing cards. He was able to purchase them after saving up enough. At the time, he was uncertain to buy them, but his mother insisted that he could since all he talked about was magic. She said it was okay and that it would be his early birthday present for that year.
All right, Mr. Garrett. Can you pick a card, please?
He asked, holding up the fanned-out deck. Mr. Garrett sighed behind the paper before dropping it and sluggishly grabbing a card. He quickly peered at the card, barely looking at the face before putting it back in. Jonathan smiled devilishly while shuffling the cards, attempting at once again to give his best announcing voice.
So you picked that card, huh? You think that suit is the one to do it? It's possible I might never find it, but you can't resist the image of the card in your mind, can you?
When he was finished shuffling, he put his finger on the top of the deck.
The card on the top will be the one you pick. Are you ready?
Mr. Garrett had a glazed look in his eyes, issuing another brisk sniff. With the awkward silence, Jonathan continued.
Okay, is this your card?
He said, lifting the card, revealing it to him. The card revealed a 3 of spades. Mr. Garrett nodded with an unfazed face.
Yeah, that's it. Good job, kid,
he replied, returning to his paper.
You're all done for the day, right? You can go home then. See you bright and early tomorrow.
Jonathan barely heard his words, having returned his attention to the picture in the paper. He smiled to himself, admiring the photo. He knew Mr. Garrett had seen the trick a million times. He needed to make a new trick, though, one that would surely blow the minds of everyone away. Better yet, if he could meet Occam Cobb, even if just for a second, he could show him his trick, and maybe it would be enough to amaze even the greatest magician. Occam Cobb would arrive in a week, which meant Jonathan had to create and perfect his trick in that allotted time frame. All throughout the next few days, he found himself contemplating on the trick, on what to do, and how to do it. He began multitasking, pondering while working on breaks, and even before sleeping at night. With the arrival of the magician coming closer, Jonathan began to worry he wouldn't be able to come up with a clever enough trick. However, 2 days before the inevitable, a new trick had dawned on him. Throughout those final 2 days, he practiced the trick intricately, even threatening to be late on a few deliveries. He became more and more obsessed to perfect it, making sure to pay attention to all the details until at last the week at hand had arrived. That day, Jonathan had never felt such a surge of anxiety and apprehension. He found himself stuttering a few times while talking to fellow customers, even with Mr. Garrett.
You all right, kid? You were a little skittish today.
For some reason, he had lost his voice at the point. He simply nodded a little. Mr. Garrett gave him a puzzled look, but gazed at the headline of one of the papers stating, "See the great Occam Cobb tonight."
Ah, you're nervous about that Cobb fellow. It really means that much to you, doesn't it?
He noted, giving off the first smile Jonathan had ever seen.
Tell you what, you can get off early today.
Jonathan's eyes lit up.
Really?
Yeah, go on. Get out of here.
With that, Jonathan took off, racing home, never stopping once until he arrived. He came across his mother, who happened to be on her way out. She was a frail-looking woman with a face stained with light wrinkles, mingling of stress and exhaustion. She stood with a slight hunch, more than likely a result from preserving the posture at the sewing factory. A few strands had managed to escape her poorly sustained bun, falling across her weary eyes. They widened when they recognized the boy running up to her.
Jonathan, what are you doing home so early?
Mother, you wouldn't believe it.
He said excitedly, half out of breath. She shook her head in complete confusion, holding up a hand to her head.
Slow down, child. Catch your breath first.
He smiled, pausing for a second before attempting to repeat the news.
Occam Cobb, Mother. He's here tonight performing.
She closed her eyes, rendering a soft sigh of relief before giving off a sheepish reply.
That's wonderful, Jonathan. I thought something terrible had happened.
No, it's the greatest thing ever.
Well, that's good. Why don't you head inside? I started to warm up some soup for dinner. I've got to head in for my next shift.
Well, Mother, I was wondering if it was maybe possible for me to go?
His mother halted, giving off another long sigh.
Jonathan, we've talked about this before. I don't mind when you play with your cards or tricks as long as it doesn't interfere with what's important. What's important right now is our home and the money we get to keep it. We can't just throw what little we have on just anything, especially not just to watch another person. Our priority is for the things that can keep us alive. You understand that, don't you?
Jonathan felt his heart grow heavy. His eyes fell to the ground slowly.
You understand?
Yes, I understand, Mother.
Good. One day, you will get over all this magic and you'll look back at this moment and realize that this was the right decision.
She said, issuing a light kiss on his forehead. Afterwards, she parted ways, disappearing down the street. Jonathan felt his eyes grow watery. A few tears escaped, rolling down his cheek. He quickly rubbed them away. His appetite had diminished, not caring for the meal his mother had prepared for him. Instead, he began walking down the street with his head still lowered. Along the way, he could see a man with a tall pole lighting the candles of street posts. Around him, the skittering of paws could be heard from the stray cats that ran amok. The sky grew cooler and darker, the streetlights becoming his only guide in the darkness. In the distance, he could see another set of lights brighter than the area around. Upon inspecting, he could tell it was coming from the city's grand theater where Occam Cobb would perform. He made his way towards the building, observing the large crowd of people flooding slowly inward. "Witness the Great Occam Cobb" was spread in large letters across a long banner hanging in the front. The people were all dressed lavishly, with men in noteworthy suits, some with comparable top hats, even a few with canes. The women wrapped along their arms were ones to gleam as well. They glowed with gorgeous dresses, coats of the most extravagant fur, and jewelry that pirouetted every movement in the light. They muttered among themselves while the line traversed forward to a man at the door accepting their tickets. The people were about to witness the performance of a lifetime, he thought to himself. Unfortunately for him, he was left to simply speculate on what marvels he would be missing out on. After several more minutes, the crowds had subsided, completely contained within the wide structure. The air around had reverted back to its ensnaring stillness. Jonathan sat across the building with his knees to his chest, resting his head atop. He listened as an orchestra could be heard blaring their instruments from inside, followed by a thunderous applause. For every long pause of silence, the orchestra would intervene, followed by another round of clapping. He was ready to return home until he was startled by a man exiting the side of the building. He was carrying a box and tossed it to the side before re-entering. Jonathan bit his lip, thinking for a second. This was his chance, and it might be his only one. He nodded his head and quickly made his way to the door. After waiting a few seconds, he attempted to turn the knob. It twisted open without effort. He carefully glanced around before entering, shutting the door behind him. Inside, he found himself to be in a poorly lit storage room. Stacks of old wooden crates towered around, some entangled in long, dusty cobwebs like fish caught in nets. The air itself smelled of oil fluid and musty loaves of bread. The amount of dust in the air managed to tickle the back of his throat. Jonathan continued through the room, being cautious to not draw attention to his presence. The faint light seeping in the room emanated through the cracks of a large set of wooden double doors. Sneaking to the doors, he placed his ear up against it to listen. He heard a few voices on the other side before they grew faint in the distance. Carefully, he gave the knob a twist, all the while pulling the door open to take a peek inside. Immediately, his face met with a calm airstream flooding his nose with an aroma of rich, sweet fragrances he couldn't describe. His eyes regarded a massive candlelit hallway decorated with walls of gold and white. Golden columns permeated from the walls expanding to the ceiling, running along both sides of the hallway. Exquisite portraits draped the walls amid the spaces of the columns, each depicting a man or woman posing in a manner of prominence. A radiant red carpet accompanied the hallway, gracefully stretching down its wide corridors. Jonathan's eyes widened, taking in the glorious sight behind him. He had never known such a beautiful configuration existed. Another loud applause from further within drew his attention back to the sights that captivated him. He frantically looked around, attempting to find some manner of entrance that could grant him an audience to the show. Making his way down the hallway, he came to a large circular room. The room was similar to that of the hallway, containing identical golden columns hugging the walls with more portraits just the same. However, a few sets of furniture were present, including a few chairs and tables that could entertain many people. Another hallway could be seen to the right, where he heard the applause erupt louder. Jonathan was ready to head towards it, but began to hear voices from within approaching his direction. Panicking, he quickly looked around the room to locate a place to conceal his presence. Finding nothing, his heart began to race frantically until he noticed a wooden staircase to the left. Without hesitation, he bolted up the stairs, which led to a stiff door. It took several pushes with his shoulder, but he was able to finally budge it a second before the voices arrived in the room below. The new area he had entered appeared to be an attic of the sort, housing similar stacks of crates like below, entangled in the cobwebs. A few rats scampered across the floor before disappearing into the darkness. The attic itself was hard to see in, with minuscule strands of light escaping out through the cracks of the floorboard. While he stood there, letting his eyes adjust to the dark, a voice startled him. It sounded muffled, but spoke as if addressing many people. It sounded near, so he began making his way through the attic, using the voice as a guide. He held his hands up to prevent himself from walking into any of the stacks. Even so, he tripped a few times. He finally came across a wooden frame with a set of old curtains drawn across. Behind the curtains, he could hear the applause even louder. His heart began to beat faster with anticipation. He reached for the curtains, pulling them to the side. Immediately, a cloud of dust was released into the air. He coughed a little while fanning the smog of particles away. When he gazed back at the window, his heart dropped. Below him, he could see countless rows filled with people down in the theater. All of them were at the edge of their seat, admiring the prospect before them. Jonathan's eyes surveyed through the rows, guiding them to where the rows met the stage. Before he could view the man upon it, he heard his voice echo throughout the air.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being the lovely audience that you have been all night.
Jonathan's eyes grew wide while a smile formed into a full-blown grin. It was him, the great Occam Cobb. With all his luck in the world, his eyes were able to gaze upon the greatest magician of all time, and without a ticket. The stage was massive with tall velvet curtains to its side, looming to meet the height of the immense ceiling. Occam Cobb himself appeared trivial upon it, but confident with his arms extended out, radiating from the illumination focused on him.
It is with my greatest pleasure that I introduce to you the final and most intricate spectacle in my hat to conclude this miraculous evening.
2 women appeared from opposite sides of the stage, each rolling a tall, thin black box that stood vertically. Each box had golden letters engraved upon them. The first displayed witness, while the second, greatness. They placed the boxes at opposite ends of the stage. At that moment, the orchestra erupted in a loud, ambitious melody.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to witness is an act so simple, so mind-blowing that it must be viewed twice to believe it. Imagine, for a second, the idea of being in 2 places at once, all under a single second, to be in one location and then a next in the blink of an eye.
The orchestra increased its tempo to further amplify the moment. It was working. Jonathan was leaning closer, eager to see what impossible feat he was describing. Below, the audience could be seen doing the same.
I am proud to present the Occam Transporter.
The audience rendered another loud wave of applause before immediately dying down, eager to hear how the trick would work.
Behold, behind me you see my 2 lovely assistants have brought forth unto you 2 boxes.
He exclaimed, holding up 2 gloved fingers.
To your left,
He gestured to the box labeled Witness.
I will step inside and enclose myself within that box.
He turned his attention to the one on the right.
I will attempt to transport myself from the first box into the next in just 1 second.
The crowd began to murmur among themselves in dissatisfaction. He paused before curling his fingers onto his chin, similar to that of the newspaper photo.
I can tell that some of you have your doubts. In fact, I think some of you think that I, the great Occam Cobb, can do better. Well, you're right.
A long chain emerged from the ceiling hovering above the left witness box.
What if I told you that I can ante up the stakes and lift the box containing me and drop it? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I will plummet to my doom if I cannot indeed transport myself from that container to the next.
Jonathan bit his lip in discontent. He did not like the sound of this act. The audience seemed to feel the same way, issuing a light clap, all the while murmuring among themselves.
And if that wasn't enough, the box I will be contained in will be secured with a lock.
One of his assistants gracefully paraded the lock in the air. At this moment, the audience grew even more rowdy. The magician extended his arms outward.
Without further delay,
He exclaimed, and immediately turned around, facing the left box. His smiling assistant opened the door for him. He walked inside the tight box, facing the audience inside. His assistant shut the door. His voice, although muffled, could still be heard within.
now my lovely assistant will apply the lock to the box.
At his cue, she applied the large padlock to the box's door.
She will now attach the chain to my case.
Again she moved on cue, climbing a small ladder brought out. At the top, she attached the chain to the box's top ring. When she climbed down, she removed the ladder. The chain began to hoist the box high into the air. Everyone at the moment was dead silent, including Jonathan. A series of knocks could be heard coming from within the case.
I assure everyone that I am still within the box. Please ensure that you do not pull eyes away. Not even for a second, or you dare to miss the opportunity to...
He continued before pausing.
Witness.
At that last mutter of the word, the chain released, plunging the box swiftly to the ground. Everyone gasped out in fear as it fell shattering into many pieces. However, the moment the box touched the ground, the door to the second box swung open.
Greatness.
The magician exclaimed, finishing his sentence from before without delay. It took a second for the audience to register what had happened, yet when they did, they quickly erupted in a thunderous applause louder than ever conceived that night. Many of them rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as they did. Jonathan clapped as well from his position, filled with a mixture of reverence and angst. He had done it. performed the impossible and amazed with true wonder. The magician smiled gracefully, taking the hand of his assistants, rendering both a light kiss. Afterwards, he issued a bow. The curtains began to gracefully descend, but stopping when he held up a hand.
Ladies and gentlemen, I informed you earlier that the trick would happen so quick that you would need to see it twice. So, how about it? Would you?
The applause died with the crowd murmuring among themselves before sitting down quietly.
I thought as much. However, I, being the great Occam Cobb, couldn't simply lull you into watching the same trick exactly. Oh no. As always, the stakes must be raised. So that's why I am giving one of you the lucky opportunity to be the one transported,
he exclaimed, extending his arms outward again. A slight delay occurred before the audience issued a light clap, continuing to murmur amongst each other.
Who dares to leave this world in a second and return in another? He asked,
pointing his finger among the seating. One of his assistants rolled another case in, setting it in front of the broken shards of the last box. The new box had the same word, witness, engraved across it. Again, Jonathan bit his lip. What he would do to be a part of that act.
I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that the box will not be suspended like the other, so there is no cause for alarm. So who will dare take the trip? Who will venture into the unknown?
There was a long pause until a man abruptly stood up from the back. I say, sir, we have a beautiful woman back here who would love to volunteer. The woman sitting next to him shook her head in dismay, playfully hitting the man to stop. However, he pressed on, jokingly urging her to do so.
Ah, yes, come along, milady.
Jonathan could see her crossing her arms in discontent, firmly glaring at the man still standing beside her.
It looks to me the lady is shy.
The crowd released a chortle. Jonathan could see the woman sinking into her seat from embarrassment.
Perhaps. A round of applause will grant her the courage she needs,
he requested, clapping his hands together. The audience followed suit, applauding. The woman began to blush before finally conceding. She stood up, making her way to the stage. The magician helped her up the small set of stairs, planting a kiss upon her hand once she was safely up. She was beautiful with short locks of blonde hair. Her white dress glimmered in comparison to the jewelry athwart her neck. Her thin figure was very much apparent from the firm press of the dress.
And what do I have the pleasure of calling you?
Carol, she responded, blushing.
Well, Carol, it is truly a pleasure to make your acquaintance,
the magician said, issuing another small kiss to her hand. She blushed harder at this notion.
Now, Carol,
he said, guiding her over to the first box.
You saw here how the trick works. I am going to place you into this box, wave my hands, and in a mere second, you will get to experience firsthand the Occam Transporter,
he said, gesturing to the box on the right. The woman swallowed a little. She spoke rather soft, her voice barely carrying across the stage. What do I have to do? The man smiled, turning his attention to the audience.
Carol, here, asked a very important question. She asked, what will she have to do? And I tell her, as I tell you, nothing. Nothing, my dear. All you have to do is enter that box, and I will do the rest. Are you ready?
She swallowed again before giving a light nod with a sheepish smile.
Okay, then,
he responded, guiding her closer to the left box. The orchestra began playing their aspiring music once again. Once the woman was in front of the door, he opened it and helped her in. Immediately, he shut the door and began knocking against the box with his fist while addressing the audience. This struck Jonathan rather odd. It was possible it was just a coincidence, but the knocks almost sounded identical to the ones earlier. He quickly shook it off, though, ready to see if the great magician could fulfill his promise.
Ladies and gentlemen, witness,
he yelled, pointing to his assistant to open the other box's door.
Greatness!
She opened the door, and as promised, the woman appeared on the other end. The assistant helped her out of the box, and the audience erupted into another thunderous applause. Strangely, though, the woman held her hand up to the air as if everything around was too bright. She almost appeared dazed. The magician briskly walked over to her, taking her hand.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Carol.
The audience continued to applaud. He took a bow while still holding her hand. The woman smiled weakly before being guided back down the stairs. Jonathan curiously watched as she continued to appear dazed before finally being guided back to the gentleman she was seated with. With that, the magician took one final bow, with the echoing of applause still roaring. The curtains made their descent soon after, fully concealing the stage. The audience below began making their way to the exit of the theater. Jonathan leaned back from the window, contemplating the last few moments he had seen. He felt a smile slowly form across his lips. After waiting for the lingering crowds to leave, he made his way back down the stairs. In the room below, he ensured no one was around before entering it again. It was marginally quiet. He could hear some of the voices of the people from outside faintly through the walls. This was his moment, he thought. This was his opportunity to see the Occam Cobb. His luck had already presented the rare opportunity of catching the most breathtaking magic act ever conceived, and was sure it hadn't ran out yet. Jonathan crept down the hallway leading further into the building. The hallway led him to a much larger room, almost similar in length, but clearly the lobby. At the end, a man was sweeping the floor, guiding the dust towards the set of doors to the entrance of the theater. His back was to Jonathan, allowing him to shuffle through the lobby to the hallway parallel. This new hallway curved around towards the direction of the stage. Coursing through it, he came to a door marked Backstage. After carefully peeking through it and finding it safe, he continued through the other side. Behind the door, the path was dark. Only 2 wall candles lit the way, the ones next to him and the others at the end. The hallway was unlike the other ones. In the light, the walls were adorned with many rough cracks in its dry wooden features. The air back here was cool, as if the wind from outside was coursing in. He could hear the small skittering of feet which suggested the presence of rats. Jonathan sighed softly and began to venture through the corridor. A few times along the way, he felt something brush against his foot. At the end of the hallway, he came across another door. The candlelight was dim, but its rays managed to illuminate the words across the door just enough. Performers only, the sign read. Jonathan pushed open the door. Inside, he found clothing racks with an abundance of outfits hanging from them. A variety of suits hung layered tightly together on several of them, while a plethora of dresses hung from others. The tight cluster of clothing made the room feel almost suffocating. He moved past them and was led to a more open part of the room. To the side, he could see a large full-body mirror up against the wall. A thin desk sat next to the mirror, sporting a chair set aside as if someone had recently left it. Piles of papers filled the top of the desk, along with a very peculiar set of gloves. Jonathan slowly approached the desk, recognizing the gloves. His fingers grazed across them, feeling the smooth silk of the fabric. Afterwards, he turned his attention back to the room around.
Hello? Mr. Occam Cobb, sir?
The air was silent as ever. He sighed softly to himself, realizing he had missed his opportunity. He started to make his way back, but stopped when he heard a voice answer him.
Yes? How can I help you, young man?
Immediately, he sprung around, and to his amazement, there stood the great Occam himself. He was a much taller man in person with a thin frame. His black, silky vest hugged tightly against his body, with the sleeves of his white button shirt rolled up to his elbows, his arms crossed. His eyes leered back with a quizzing nature while his sharp chin was raised. Jonathan noticed how the colors of his eyes differed, one being blue, while the other appeared hazel brown, For a second, he was speechless, still surprised by his sudden appearance and the fact he was viewing the man he held as an idol.
Well?
Occam continued. Finally, he managed to find his voice.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to inform you that I'm your biggest fan.
The man was silent before replying.
Is that so? Why are you back here?
Jonathan grew quiet again, trying to find the right way to answer. After seeing this for a minute, the man's eyes warmed up. A smile grew across his face.
Did you see the show?
Yes, I did. Well, I saw the last act.
And
it was spectacular.
The smile grew larger on the man's face.
Just from your reaction, I can tell you're quite the magic lover. Am I right?
Jonathan nodded excessively, smiling greater than ever.
More than anything, I want to become a great magician, just like yourself, sir.
Occam seemed pleased with this statement, lowering his arms and inviting the boy further in the room.
What's your name, my boy?
It's Jonathan, sir.
Tell me, Jonathan, what kind of acts draw your attention the most?
He asked, taking a seat on the chair.
Well, right now, I've been using cards for my tricks.
Ah, playing cards. Believe it or not, I began my career with playing cards as well. I used to entertain people down on the streets. It seems like it was only yesterday. As you can see, I've come a long way from then. And you can too.
You think so?
Of course, lad. Everyone makes their humble beginnings from one walk of life or another. The important thing to remember is to not forget why you love magic. Your love of magic will keep you going even through the times that grow rough. And believe me, there will be some.
Jonathan nodded, taking in the advice.
Well, sir, I would be lying if I didn't tell you the real reason why I'm here.
Oh? And what is that?
Well, I wanted to show you a trick of my own, if that's okay with you.
The light in his off-colored eyes seemed to grow brighter at the request. He returned another worn smile before crossing his legs and laying his chin in his hand.
I would be delighted.
Excited, Jonathan pulled out the deck of cards from his pocket. Occam stared with distaste when he caught sight of the worn-out appearance of the cards.
I can tell you've been hard at work. However, those cards most certainly will not do.
He scoffed. He pulled out a box of cards from his pocket and held them out for the boy. Jonathan simply looked at the box, depicting the image Occam on the front, and then at the man with uncertainty.
Please, take them. You can use them when you become the next great magician. A great magician always performs with his best.
Jonathan smiled gratefully, taking them. Occam took his beaten deck and placed it on the desk behind him. Jonathan removed the cards from the box. The fresh scent of the cards filled his nose, an aroma he hadn't experienced in a long time. He carefully stuffed the box in his pocket as to not damage it and began shuffling the deck. He was nervous, feeling his heart heatedly pound against his chest. He glanced at the magician ever so often while shuffling the cards. The man was instinctively focused on them. It was clear he was no stranger to hasty deceits that the hand could portray with cards, even in the initial shuffle. This notion only further instilled tension in his heart. After the cards were thoroughly shuffled, he took a deep breath. There was nothing to worry about, he thought. He had practiced for days with little end until his very hands cramped from fatigue. He just had to perform the trick one more time. He held out the deck of cards, still stacked neatly.
Can you please select the card on top, sir?
The request seemed to puzzle the man.
You want me to select a card now, without fanning them out?
Jonathan swallowed at this before answering with a slight squeak in his voice.
Yes, sir.
Occam frowned a little before picking up the card to view.
Do not let me see the card.
Jonathan split the deck in half, holding each part in one hand.
Okay, if you would, sir, place your card back in the deck.
He continued, holding the hand with the lower portion of the deck out. Immediately, the magician complied as instructed, setting the card face down. Following the action, Jonathan placed the upper set of cards atop.
I will now shuffle the cards,
He informed, beginning to mix them. Without warning, the cards suddenly slipped from his fingers, scattering across the floor below. Jonathan froze, closing his eyes in shame while biting his lip. Occam was unfazed, although his displeased expression had expanded across his face.
That's quite all right. Accidents happen, my dear boy. The show must continue nonetheless.
Jonathan nodded and began picking up the messy array of cards. After a few moments, he managed to obtain them all, standing up ready to face the magician again.
Is it okay if I start over?
Occam issued a light head nod, still residing in his previous posture.
Okay.
Jonathan began. He started to shuffle the cards again. Once the tiresome act was completed, he held out the deck for the man to choose a card for a second time. However, once he reached out a hand to pick a card, Jonathan immediately retracted the deck away.
Is there something wrong, my boy?
Occam questioned with a baffled look.
Well, sir, I was going to have you pick a card, but I realized you never returned the first card you selected.
The man's brow furrowed heavily as a profound contortion appeared across his lips.
I assure you, my boy, that I did indeed return the card. Perhaps in your mishap you did not pick it up? How would you know otherwise?
Perhaps you're right, sir. I guess I must have missed the one under your foot.
The man took a second to gaze down, lifting his foot, and to his surprise, a card was face down underneath. He picked up the card, attempting to hand it to the boy until his eyes glanced at his face. His brow lifted and a heartfelt smile cultivated athwart his lips. He produced a warm laugh, almost uncontrollably for what felt like several long minutes to Jonathan. Unsure what to do, Jonathan simply stood there.
My boy, that was a very interesting and yet bold act, dare I say. Very tricky indeed.
It was Jonathan's turn to smile then.
How did you derive such trick?
Well, when I learned of your coming, I knew I wanted to make a special trick just for you, but I knew it had to be a clever one. However, when I tried to think of one to create, I couldn't. The trick I presented to you now was like the one I saw performed by an old magician on the streets. His act was similar, but more elaborate. At the time, I didn't know how he did it, but later, I figured it out. That act is what drew me into magic in the first place.
Occam placed his hand on Jonathan's shoulder, simply amused.
It is moments like those that true magic is realized. To have the idea to instill the same spellbinding moment that was casted upon yourself onto others. Thank you for sharing your act with me, Jonathan.
No, thank you, sir.
Jonathan replied, rendering a light bow. After issuing one last appreciation, he began to make his way out.
How would it sound,
Occam called out behind him,
to learn a new trick or two from me?
Immediately, Jonathan sprung around.
Learn a new trick? From you? The great Occam Cobb?
That's right. I can take you under my wing and teach you prevailing tricks to showcase for everyone you know. While I'm still in town, that is. Sadly, I depart at the end of the week. But I'm confident that you can master such rudiments in time as you did so in preparation for an audience with me. What do you say?
Jonathan gave an answer without hesitating.
Of course! I would love to. Thank you, sir, for the honor.
With a pleased look, Occam beamed.
Excellent, my boy. Simply make your return every evening as you did so tonight, and I will instruct upon you a new trick for you to rehearse.
Yes, sir. I won't let you down,
Jonathan replied. His eyes began to look at the ground, though.
Yet, how will I get past the ticket man? To tell the truth, sir, I didn't exactly walk through the front door to see the show.
The man produced a light chuckle. With the card from earlier still in his hand, he cupped it before revealing it again. It had changed.
Use this,
he said, handing it to Jonathan. Jonathan glanced at the object. The card was much larger with a picture of Occam Cobb with his arms stretched out. Above his picture, the words "All Access Pass" stood bolded out.
Show that to the doorman, and he'll let you in without a fuss. You can even view my show again. All of it, this time, from the front row seat.
Filled with joy beyond measure and without warning, he gave the man an alarming hug of compassion. The notion caught Occam off guard, but he quickly collected himself. After the tenderizing moment, he bid the boy farewell. A few tears had formed in Jonathan's eyes, but he made sure not to reveal them. He simply made his way out to the door with his prize pass in hand and a new deck of cards. Promptly, he halted on the other side. He realized he had forgotten his old deck of cards being caught up in the moment earlier. Sure, he had new cards, but he wanted to only use them when performing in front of others like Occam had instructed. He decided that his old cards would be the deck to use while he practiced. He returned through the door, ready to excuse his second intrusion, but was quickly terrified at the action he perceived. Occam Cobb was nowhere to be seen. Well, almost. The moment he stepped past the clothing racks, he witnessed the back heel of the magician pull through the mirror on the wall, vanishing on the other side. The mirror's reflective surface rippled from the action momentarily prior to settling back into its flat appearance. Jonathan was starstruck, frozen in terror and astonishment. Rubbing his eyes for a second, he stared at the mirror, which simply offered back his reflective, confused expression. Had he really seen such an act? Cautiously, he approached the mirror, hesitantly holding out a hand. He flinched for a second when it touched the surface, having expected his hand to pass through, but instead it only met the hard surface. Now he was very confused. It shouldn't have been that far-fetched. He was in fact dealing with the great Occam Cobb, the greatest magician, right? Yet, despite trying to convince himself of this ordeal, a deep sensation sat at the bottom of his stomach, fabricating an unpleasant vibe. As if what he had witnessed wasn't enough, something else threw him off. Emitting from the mirror, at least what he thought was the source, was the slightest breeze of cool air. It was as if a window was cracked open, or rather it felt more like someone was softly blowing cool air in his face. The breeze felt odd when it met against his skin. Its chilly winds not only felt icy, but it was accompanied with the slightest tickle. It felt like someone was softly dragging the tips of their fingers across his cheeks, as if carefully caressing his skin. A sharp shiver quickly pulsated through his body. The thought of an unseen figure standing before him was quite eerie, but it was impossible. He shook the thought off and grabbed his old deck of cards before swiftly making his way out and back home. The next evening, Jonathan was eager to return to the theater. Upon finishing his work, he immediately bolted to the building without stopping home. He opted to not inform his mother about the past and knew she would be working her usual long hours. At the theater, Jonathan could see another large crowd of people waiting in line for the door. They looked at him funny when they saw him join among them. Obvious his attire was nothing in comparison to theirs. He didn't care, though. Unlike them, he had an all-access pass and a guaranteed front row seat. When he reached the door, the ticket man gave him the same questioning look. Jonathan proudly presented him the pass, which still made the man stare at the boy with a suspicious expression for having it. However, he eventually let Jonathan through, who was then escorted by another gentleman. The man led him through the main lobby he recognized from the previous evening. The other guests inside were talking amongst themselves while admiring the interior decorations. A few gave snobbish glares at him. Jonathan was taken through a set of large double doors leading to the main theater seating. The room appeared much grander than when he was in the attic above. On the ground, he could see just how extraordinarily high it really was for the ceiling. He wasn't able to tell then, but now he could clearly note the rows of seating elevating the further back they stretched. The stage was massive as ever and almost intimidating up close, but it was beautiful nonetheless. To the far right next to the stage, Jonathan saw the musicians, mumbling among themselves and tuning their instruments. The conductor was an elderly man standing upon a perch beaming instructions to a few of the players. Jonathan was led to a seat in the center of the rows. He thanked the man and proceeded to sink into the seat. It was surprisingly comfortable with a soft cushion. He smiled to himself, still not believing where he was. After several long minutes, everyone eventually had found their own seats. Soon after, The orchestra began to play, signaling the beginning of the show. Occam Cobb emerged from the backstage smiling and then bowing. For a moment, his eyes caught Jonathan's and he rendered a slight nod in his direction. From then, the show went on as planned, with Jonathan breathlessly watching all the performances conducted. After the show, Jonathan returned to the backstage to meet Occam. The magician was there and instructed a new trick for him to learn as promised. This continued throughout the week, with Jonathan practicing hard on his newly learned tricks when he could. He returned every evening to watch the show and later performed the trick he was taught in front of the magician to receive any necessary critique. One evening, after Jonathan's time with Occam had expired, he lingered behind. He hadn't forgotten about the strange event he had witnessed the first night. Furthermore, he was too afraid to question the magician about it, fearing he might anger him. Instead, Jonathan wanted to witness the magician conduct the act in its entirety. After viewing many of his shows, he began to suspect the Occam transporter was tied to the event. He remembered the series of knocks Occam did and realized that he did so every time for that particular performance, and it was always done in the same manner. Jonathan just needed to see it one time to confirm his theory. Hiding behind one of the clothing racks, he peered inside the room. Inside, the man was simply reading the newspaper. An hour or two went by, and Jonathan's legs began to feel a sharp cramp of pain from standing so long, but he ignored the pain. He needed to see this. Finally, Occam checked his pocket watch. Afterwards, he took up his dress jacket, pulling it on, ensuring it was properly fitted. From there, he approached the mirror. He issued 2 quick knocks near the top, followed by a delayed one in the middle. Next, he issued 2 final knocks slightly lower below the first 2. Jonathan watched in bewilderment as the man took a step into the mirror until his entire body had disappeared. The mirror rippled momentarily before settling into its solid stance like before. He couldn't believe it. He was right. The knocks were the same. It was how he was able to transport himself on the stage. He walked up to the mirror, seeing his reflection stare back in amazement. A light, cool breeze met with his face. Once again, he felt a chill fall down his spine until feeling the gentle brushing across his skin. It felt stronger than before, as if several more fingers were eerily caressing his skin in long strokes. He shivered out of impulse, attempting to brush the feelings away. He bit his lip again. Curiosity had fixated its roots unfathomably in him. He needed to know what was behind it. Raising a shaking hand, he began to mimic the knocks of the magician. Upon issuing the final knock, he could tell the mirror had changed. It was no longer just a mirror. He held up his hand to the surface, slowly edging towards it. He could feel the draft against his hand, the feeling of many more ghostly fingers brushing against it. When his hand finally met with the surface, it felt like it was being submerged into an icy pool of water. The mirror rippled across, distorting his reflection. This was it, he thought. He closed his eyes and stepped forward, completely submerging inside. Jonathan stumbled in, reaching the other side of the would-be door. At first glance, he thought he had forgotten to open his eyes, but realized that he had done so after blinking a few times. The world around, everything was completely black. His eyes could not distinguish if the ground existed or if he was floating in an ocean of nothingness. It all seemed like one. The same waft from before streamed around him effortlessly. Its invisible fingers now evolved from caressing his skin to tapping as if someone or something was trying to gain his attention. With each tap, he spun around, his heart colliding against his chest, expecting to meet the face of his would-be tormentor, only to be met by the perpetual void around. The taps grew in frequency, touching him all over. The more they did, the more they felt like hands. Hands that were brushing, caressing, and grabbing. He couldn't help but jolt in fear to every direction he felt. Each sensation felt new, never like the other, only instilling more terror. His eyes scanned in horror at every angle, but darkness was all he could see. At moments, it felt like his eyes could perceive a strange figure or shape before him, but when he blinked, it mended back to the same veil of black. It wasn't just the hands that were tormenting him. It was the obscuring darkness, too. He could feel his stomach churn, feeling nauseous as if the world around him was spinning, not him. Even his head felt light. He needed to get out. He couldn't bear this world any longer. He couldn't control his breathing. Was the area getting smaller? Was it even as big as he thought it was? Maybe it was all just a small room, and he was trapped inside. He reached around, hoping to feel the entrance for the mirror, but all he could feel was empty air. His heart's tempo was now an echoing crash against his chest, beating in his ears like a ceremonious drum. He flung his arms around helplessly, hoping to feel for anything. Without warning, he felt something forcefully grab his hand, yanking him forward before harshly letting him go. He immediately shrilled out in horror, falling back and shutting his eyes. Tears managed to escape through his eyelids.
I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home.
He repeatedly whispered to himself, rocking softly. Hesitantly, he slowly opened his eyes, ready to gaze upon whatever horror had grabbed him. Yet, his eyes once again only met with the teasing black obscurity. He wanted to believe nothing was there, but his senses had their own agenda, filling his mind with horrid anomalies in the abyss before him. There's nothing there, he thought to himself. He needed to believe it. Jonathan didn't know what to do. What was going to happen to him now? Was he going to die here? And if he did, no one, not even his mother, would know what had happened to him or even where to find him. A few more tears began to stream from his eyes at the realization of the inevitable hopelessness. Upon lifting his hand to rub them, he noticed a faint light across it. A light glow emanated from his hand. It looked as though his fingers were covered in ink or paint of some kind. Inspecting the ground, he realized the origin of the strange substance derived from whatever appeared to be a footprint. It puzzled him because he hadn't noticed it before. Perhaps his eyes hadn't adjusted yet. Looking even closer, he realized there were more footprints in a trail heading away from his location. It was Occam Cobb. It had to be him, he thought. A feeling of relief came to him, eager to find the magician. At this point, he didn't care if the man would be angry with him. He just wanted to get out of this place. He made his way forward, following the footprints. They curved in odd directions, but continued to stretch onward. It felt like hours had passed as he followed them. By now, Jonathan finally realized that the tormenting hands had ceased. He wasn't sure why they had or when exactly their foreign touches had stopped. Maybe it was something to do with the substance he accidentally touched? Did the stuff somehow keep them at bay? It felt like more time had elapsed, and Jonathan was beginning to feel impatient, anxious to get free. The more he pressed on, the more he believed he would catch a glimpse of Occam ahead, but he never did. While walking, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone anymore. It felt like something was watching him from the shadows, something with a malicious intent. He didn't know why, but it felt as if whatever was watching him wanted to inflict harm upon him. A few times he couldn't help but turn his head at what he thought were very faint whispers. They were so faint he couldn't decipher them, although he caught one word: stay. He was beginning to feel hopeless again until something ahead caught his eyes. He could barely make out the silhouette of a figure in the distance. It took a minute for his mind to register. It was Occam. Without thinking, he called out, hoping to attract his attention.
Mr. Cobb! Mr. Cobb, wait! It's me! It's Jonathan!
However, he already began to disappear. Tears started pouring out of his eyes at the realization that he was crossing back over to the other world. The world he knew. He would be trapped for sure. He attempted to race to the man's location, still yelling. In response to hearing the boy's voice, though, Jonathan heard a collection of frightening roars. He could feel their vibrations against his skin. All around him, he could hear the harsh pounding of feet, as if a stampede of large beasts were sprinting towards him. Whatever dwelled in this darkness, it was coming for him. He was now at a full sprint, focusing his eyes on the last location he saw Occam. The things behind him were closing in on him quickly, their roars echoing all around. Below him, Jonathan's eyes watched in horror as the glowing footprints started to fade before him. He could start to feel the tips of fingers touching his face again, now accompanied by the whispers. The whispers grew louder, amplifying into deafening roars, all blaring the same single word, "Stay." Hot tears continued to fall from Jonathan's face. His lungs were burning profusely. He couldn't stop now. He knew the things were right behind him, ready to do God knows what to him. His legs began to cramp from exhaustion, but he ignored the pain with all his willpower until he slammed into what felt like a wall. A sharp pain spread across his nose and lips. His head was throbbing immensely. Despite this, he stumbled quickly to his feet, feeling across the would-be wall. Behind him, he could hear the pounding of feet and roaring growing closer. His head was full of the voices now screaming the word at him. The feelings of hands had escalated to painful grabs. They were squeezing him tightly, holding him back for the beams behind him. He screamed uncontrollably while banging against the wall to be let out, but was given no response. He could feel the invisible hands tug at his shirt, now pulling him back, practically dragging him with great force. He could feel his body begin to lose balance. When he glanced back, he could barely distinguish a large mass of black figures, blacker than even the world around, darting towards him. How could something be darker than this abyss? Suddenly, he felt a hand grab his arm and promptly jerk him forward through the wall onto the other side. Blinding light consumed Jonathan, throwing him momentarily into a realm of pure white. When the light subsided, his eyes came into focus upon the concerned gaze of a man before him. It was Occam Cobb. The remaining world came into view. They were in a room, a fairly big one. It appeared very elegant, garnishing a large king-size bed. Several pieces of furniture sat around the room, glowing in an ostentatious brown that was similar of the walls around. The sweet aroma of fruit and honey graced the air. Upon seeing Occam, Jonathan swiftly embraced him, clinging tight. He shook endlessly, not letting go, with tears streaming down his face. Occam held a confused and guilty look on his own face.
"It's all right, lad. You're safe now,"
Occam said, calmly rubbing his back. After several minutes, he pried the boy loose from his chest, promising another set of assuring words for his safety. He left into another room momentarily when Jonathan could hear the sound of water. Shortly after, Occam returned with a wet towel in his hand. He gently brought the towel to Jonathan's face, who felt a sharp pain when he did.
"I'm sorry, but your nose and lip is bleeding."
Words finally returned to Jonathan.
Oh, where are we?
"In a hotel, not too far from the theater."
Occam replied, still applying the towel to his face.
"I know what you're thinking right now. I know you must have so many questions."
Jonathan remained silent, looking down at his arms, which were plagued sparsely with purple bruises. The imprints of fingers and even full hands could vaguely be seen embedded among them. Occam continued, saying that it's a lot to take in, especially since that's how he felt when Occam first went there himself. Jonathan asked, "And where is there?" Occam became motionless. After a minute, he sighed and made his way to the bed to sit.
"I suppose you deserve an explanation. In my early career, before all the fame, before I had a single cent to my name, and the name Occam Cobb was but just that, I traveled the world. Back then, I was an ambitious one, eager to find better ways to improve the little tricks I had mastered. You see, my boy, I know what it feels like to endlessly search one's mind for an idea to create true wonder in people's eyes. What I did come up with didn't seem flashy enough. They were all just foolish little tricks. Child's play, really. Pardon my words."
He paused for a second to run his hand through his hair.
I wanted to show people real magic. I craved for it so much that I was willing to do anything to get it. Unfortunately, I found what I was looking for. I had a rather wealthy friend who was in debt to me. In return for his assistance, I was willing to consider the debt paid. So he funded my travels, including any guides or translators that I needed. My travels brought me to the heart of the East, where I stumbled upon an old underground site. You should have seen it, my boy. It was truly magnificent, almost like an underground city going on for miles. We could have spent a year down there and still barely cracked the surface of learning all of what truly was there.
A smile was across his face when he explained this, but it soon faded.
Then we found the library. With my translator, we learned what the place was and who had created it through the library's recorded texts. The place used to be the home of cultists who worshipped and conducted rituals down there. I, of course, wasn't interested in any of that. What did interest me were the incantations they conducted. The cultists were able to perform miraculous things. They were able to cloak themselves, bend the elements, even open doors to other worlds. I should have heeded my guide and translator's warnings. But like the fool I was, I didn't want to hear it. I coerced them to reveal the secrets onto me. After that day, everything changed. Oh, I wish I could correct that fateful day. I learned a great deal of dark magic at that time, some of which you have seen in my performances. However, the most noteworthy one you know to be the Occam Transporter. The simple act involves opening a door to another world, as noted. In that world, time doesn't exist. It normally takes me what would be about an hour's time to traverse from one door to another in that world. But back in this world, a mere second is all that elapses. You've experienced this world for yourself. You've felt its exceptionalism, haven't you?
Jonathan swallowed hard at the mention of this.
The door to that world can be opened by rendering a series of knocks in a unique pattern. This pattern derives from the ritual conducted by the cultists.
I don't understand. Why would they want to enter a world like that?
If you recall, I mentioned that the cultists conducted their rituals and worshipping in the underground city. They worshipped what they referred to as the Teneborsi, roughly translated as the dark, shadowy ones.
A strong shiver quickly crept down Jonathan's back. His memory dawned on the figures he had seen earlier before Occam managed to pull him back. He was grateful his eyes were not able to view them clearly, but even so, the image of their obscure forms, even darker than the world itself, still brought faint tears in his eyes.
In that world, the Teneborsi dwell. In the texts, we found out they taught the earlier cultists how to use dark magic. In the end, the cultists began to worship the beings. In return for their knowledge, the cultists conducted sacrifices to them.
Sacrifices? What kind of sacrifices?
Occam paused for a moment before continuing on, ignoring the question.
I began the study of the arts, learning as those cultists of past had done so. Soon, I was able to devise a way that would suit a performance in front of audiences without divulging the fact that I really was using magic.
I don't understand. I saw you in that place. Those things noticed me, but they didn't notice you.
Trust me, lad. They did more than notice you. Teneborsi are a greedy bunch, lad. They would sooner fight amongst themselves to obtain their prize. They act as simple observers, only in the beginning. When the time is right, they pounce, trying to beat the other from reaching their target.
Jonathan gulped ever harder.
They don't notice me because I veil myself in the same manner as the cultists. They had special material so that beings would know who the sacrifice was. I had this material applied to all of my clothes, although it doesn't last very long. I've done the same with my shoes. I'm sure you noticed my glowing footprints.
Jonathan took a second to glance down at them.
A brutal bunch. But those people were cunning enough to use special incantations in their footwear. This allowed them to find their way back from the darkness. There you see. Now you know all my secrets.
True, but there's just one thing you haven't answered.
Occam's frown returned, knowing the question already.
The sacrifices. Am I right?
Jonathan simply nodded. The magician took another long, solemn sigh.
I am not a madman. I assure you. What I do without choice and in complete discontent.
A few tears started to swell up in his eyes.
The veil from my clothes, it only lasts a short time.
A tear began to roll down his cheek.
And those things, they cornered me one day. They threatened to... What they would do to me, I cannot put into words.
His face was now in his hands, and he was bawling out in tears. Jonathan didn't know what to do, but for some reason his body reacted, placing his hand on the man's shoulder for comfort.
They asked me to send the others in my place. If I did so, I could use the realm for whatever I please. More so, they would leave me unharmed.
How did you...
Jonathan began to ask, but stopped in his words, realizing the answer for himself.
That's right, my boy. The second part of my transporter act. When I ask the audience to volunteer, I'm really asking for a sacrifice to those fiends.
Jonathan backed away from the man. His thoughts sprung on all the people he had witnessed volunteer for the act. He even recalled wishing he could be a part of the act.
What happens to them?
I don't know. The cultist texts only mentioned that they couldn't take the light of our world. It's too bright for them. I simply know that people enter that world, but what returns in their place isn't a human being anymore.
Another shiver fell down Jonathan's back.
What do they want?
At that moment, Occam gave Jonathan the most frightening look he had ever seen from the man. It was a look of pure uncertainty.
I do not know.
The awkward silence between the two lasted for minutes before Occam finally rose to his feet. He walked over to a table in the corner and proceeded to pour himself a glass of bourbon. The silence continued as he sipped on the glass, slowly staring off into space. Finally, Jonathan spoke out, unable to cope with the quietness.
You should stop this.
Occam appeared unfazed at the words, as if not hearing them. Jonathan repeated his words. In return, Occam chuckled to himself.
If only it were that simple, my boy.
But it is. You can't keep handing these people over to them. You're killing them.
They are killing them, lad, not I. I'm simply a courier,
he said, sipping his glass without looking back.
Handing them over makes you as much of a killer as them.
The words did not seem to sit well with Occam. He threw his glass into the wall before running up to the boy and grabbing him.
I am no killer. I am nothing like those things. They do it. It's all them. It always was.
His eyes blared like a madman, peering deep into Jonathan's as he shook the boy. Seeing the fear engulf the boy's eyes, he swiftly released his grip.
I'm sorry, lad. I can't do what you're asking of me. Every time I enter that world, I am reminded of the horror I do. I can feel them touching me, feel their sorrows seep upon my face. I'm sorry. My hands are tied, and I don't know what to do.
Jonathan placed his hand on his shoulder.
You once told me to never forget why I loved magic, that my love for it would be the reason enough to help me through the rough times. What this isn't magic. It's evil. You know what to do.
The man calmly looked at Jonathan, pulling away soon after.
I'm sorry, child. I cannot do what you ask of me.
With that answer, Jonathan reached into his pockets, pulling out the 2 decks of cards, his worn-out one, and the newer deck given to him by Occam. He handed the cards over to Occam, who returned a puzzled gaze. Afterwards, he slowly walked over to the door.
It's my life or theirs, child.
Occam muttered weakly with a trembling lip. Jonathan opened the door, turning around to the man.
I know. I also know you lost your love for magic. You used to be Occam Cobb, the greatest magician in the world. You were my idol. Right now, it's your life you love the most. If this is where magic takes you, then I'm done with it,
he said coldly, shutting the door behind him, leaving the man alone. He took his time walking home. While he did, he recalled the words his mother pushed on him the days before. She knew one day he would get over magic. And somehow inside, he knew she would be right, but deep down, it wasn't the reason he thought it would be for. The following day, the paper's headline read, "The Great Occam Cobb's final performance will be held tonight."
It's the last day to see your idol. You going to it, kid?
Jonathan shook his head softly.
No, I think I'm over him.
The answer gave Mr. Garrett a puzzled look. He was ready to question the boy further on it, but Jonathan had walked away to complete his work. Mr. Garrett soon shrugged the matter off and returned to reading his newspaper. The following day, Jonathan was met with an alarming headline. "The Great Occam Cobb Vanishes." The headline caught his attention, and he began reading the article out loud.
Occam Cobb, known as the greatest magician of our time, set out to perform his final show over the evening. The magician has been doing well, selling out tickets to all his shows for the entire week. His performances dazzled audiences with never-before-seen marvels. His most noteworthy one, the Occam Transporter, had audiences baffled beyond belief. However, events took a turn when the famed magician elected to transport an audience member, having already done so by himself. Audiences were thrown for a loop when Cobb elected to enter the box again instead of the selected volunteer. Even stranger, the audience was surprised when the magician never appeared in the other box as prior depicted. At first, the audience thought it was a joke, but when the magician never appeared after several minutes, people began to worry. As of now, local officials are investigating. If anyone has information on Occam Cobb's disappearance, they are to contact local authorities immediately.
Shame of a thing indeed. Sorry about all that, kid.
Mr. Garrett replied, overhearing him read the article. Jonathan didn't respond. He had done it, he thought. He defied them. He felt a small smile form across his lips. He was a true lover of magic after all. Many years later, Jonathan became a successful businessman. At some point, he managed to earn enough to take care of his mother. They moved away from the city, owning a nice house in the countryside. His mother, who no longer had to work long hours, spent most of her days attending the garden of the house. One day, Jonathan was in the city for business. While passing an old newspaper stand, he caught sight of the headline, "Be amazed as a man claiming to be the once great Occam Cobb performs tonight." The article struck Jonathan odd, but he shrugged it off, believing it to be a man honoring the legacy of Occam. Later that night, he decided to watch the show for old time's sake. That evening, he sat in the middle row. It wasn't as close as a seat he had as a child, but it was close enough. The show began with the orchestra blaring their ambitious instruments like he remembered. He smiled to himself, the moment bringing back nostalgic memories. Immediately after the instruments began playing, a man emerged upon the stage. He looked vaguely familiar. It wasn't until he stepped clear into the light that Jonathan could see him. When he did, his heart dropped and his eyes grew big. There, standing on the stage, was Occam Cobb, who appeared as if he hadn't aged a day since the last time he saw him. Even stranger, Occam appeared to squint many times, as if the light was too bright for him to bear. I was at an after-work mixer not that long ago. Nothing big, just a gathering with some out-of-towners. We had a couple of drinks and got talking about the most unusual parts of our job. Nowadays, I work in bookkeeping, but I've been doing evaluation and audits back in the day. At 4 drinks in, the conversation drifted to where it always goes. Your weirdest job story. Now, I told them this stupid anecdote about a man who wanted to evaluate his vast collection of erotic art. It's a funny story that never fails to get a laugh. But that's not my weirdest job story. That story doesn't do quite as well at parties. But just this once, I'd like to tell it. I'd like to tell you about Flamingo. Some time ago, I did evaluations for a firm specializing in liquidation of company assets. Basically, when something went bankrupt, we were called in to evaluate the worth of leftover inventory, assets, and whatever else was legally owned by the company in question. This isn't exciting work. More often than not, we got it all on paper on day one. We just had to make sure it was really there. Glorified fact checkers. It was a scorching hot summer. My allergies were acting up, and the news was flooded about this missing 10-year-old girl. She'd been gone for days, and the video of her family pleading to the public was on repeat. Not a lot happened in that one area of the world, so this would be the biggest story of the year by far. I was practically melting through the floor when my boss dropped by my desk, fanning himself with a folder. "You got the email?" "What? No." "Okay, good." He sat down next to me, dropping the folder on my desk. "I was planning on sending you and Don on this, but Don has got to take some time off." "I got it, it's fine." "No, see, this is bigger than usual. I ain't sure what to make of it." "What do you mean?" "There's a lot of questions here, and we don't have a lot of answers. It's not just going to be checking some files. It's a lot. That's why I wanted to send Don, too, but..." He shrugged, giving me an apologetic smile. He tapped me on the shoulder and turned as he walked away. "Just take your time with this one. Do it right." Shortly after, I got an email about a private company that was getting liquidated. It was a small privately owned tech company based out of South Dakota. The sole elderly owner had recently passed in a home invasion gone wrong, and the board had decided to liquidate the company in its entirety. We'd gotten a couple of years' worth of documentation, but this company had been up and running since the 70s. I was going to be standing literally neck deep in paperwork. No wonder my boss wanted Don to help out. We got most of the paperwork sent to the office later that day. I had to sign off on box after box being dropped off at the door. I almost tore my back out carrying them all in, and the heat wasn't helping. The boxes were immaculately labeled, but we were talking decades of work. Financing, projections, board meetings, budgeting, personnel files. It was all there. By the time I had it all lined up, I had accidentally built myself a cubicle. I hadn't played in a box fort for years, but this was a decent enough substitute. I didn't know where to begin. Usually we got something to start with, but this was just dropped off and that was that. I had to start with the most recent reports and work my way back. There wasn't that much to be excited about. Those first few days, I listed assets like a company car and a regional office. There was also a rented storage space. I found some receipts for office equipment and a couple of computers, but most of them were from the early 2000s. I think it was somewhere in the delivery receipts that I first noticed the word Flamingo. It snapped me back to attention for a moment. It's not the kind of thing you expect to read in a budgeting report, but it was right there. Flamingo. It wasn't a big cost, but big enough to be included in the yearly budget. No further explanation, no details, just a flamingo. I put it aside for a while, but I noticed the word coming up every now and then, and as I looked through the files. And sometimes it'd show up in delivery receipts, other times in R&D or even storage. I could be reading about Microsoft Office subscriptions and then, wham, flamingo. It catches your attention, especially when you have no idea what it means. I was about 1 full week into mapping the company assets when my boss got a call. Apparently, while we were still working on processing inventory, someone had broken into the regional office. The police were asking for someone to come down and do inventory, asking if there was any way to know what had been stolen. Someone had to go to South Dakota, and it wasn't going to be Don. He still had time off. I drove out on a Tuesday. Windows down, blasting cold air, having an iced tea in my cup holder. The radio was still going on and on about this missing girl, but the tone had turned somber. It was no longer about finding her alive. It was more about recovery and finding out what had really happened to her. They were speculating, drawing parallels to other missing children, asking uncomfortable questions and pointing fingers at those in power who hadn't done enough. It was a nice distraction, even if the subject matter was morbid. It was a long drive, but the one-story office building was easy to find. They'd taken down the signs, and it was the only parking space that was completely empty, save for a squad car. 2 officers were ready to meet up front. I had printed out a list of items that I suspected would be at the office according to the most recent receipts. Just the big stuff. I figured burglars wouldn't be looking for staplers and reams of paper. If they just got away with some copiers and computers, we could probably get an insurance payout. There were 2 officers out front. They waved me over and escorted me inside, keeping the small talk to a minimum. Just a couple of lines and how about this weather? I couldn't blame them. One of them was on the chubbier side, and he was melting through his uniform. There was no doubt that the place had been robbed. The front door was smashed to pieces. I had to step over the glass as I made my way inside. "You know what's strange?" the chubby one said. "The door opens inward, but it's been smashed the other way." "Why is that strange?" I asked, glass crackling under my feet. "I mean, if they could get in, they could get out. Why break the door? Hell, the lock's still there, see?" He used his flashlight for emphasis. I nodded at him, taking a closer look. He was right. The entire door had been smashed to pieces from inside the office, torn straight from the hinges, and the lock was seemingly untouched. The officers left me to do their job, asking me to call once I was finished so they could get a proper report about missing or damaged items. I was left on my own for a while as I went around taking pictures, double-checking with my list of confirmed assets. Now, the place was admittedly a mess, but not as bad as one might imagine. The lights were working just fine, and most of the furniture was okay. A couple of things had been tipped over, and the drawers in one of the desks had been thrown to the floor, but all the electronics were still there. In fact, I couldn't see that anything had been stolen. Not anything big, at least. One thing stood out, though. At the far end of the room, there was a supply closet. The door was broken in 2, and all the boxes inside were scattered on the floor. One of the boxes had been torn to shreds. An old dust-caked box with a yellow note taped to the side. Flamingo. After talking to the police, I decided to take some time to look closer at what exactly flamingo was supposed to be. There were a couple of notes here and there, but it was always separated by a degree of vagueness. For example, I noticed there were gas receipts about once per month when one of the employees went on a longer drive. That always coincided with a pattern of other receipts for such things as glycerin, antifreeze, and something described as Compound 5 Mix B. Same pattern over and over. Now, I didn't have a clear idea of what flamingo was supposed to be, but there were some patterns emerging. It was something that had been going on since the 70s, up to the point of the company's liquidation. Some kind of ongoing thing that was only shut down once the company lost its funding. Flamingo wasn't that expensive, but it was definitely recurring. There had to be something else to it. Some kind of documentation that showed what the hell we were dealing with. At the very least, I needed some kind of description so I could do my job. I can't evaluate something if I don't know what it is. While in town, I decided I should check out the storage space. I had a pretty good idea of the kind of things they kept there, but I figured I might as well double check. I'd had the keys delivered earlier that week, and it wasn't a long drive. Might as well. It was a private storage space as part of a larger warehouse location. Basically, a walled-off section lined with chain-link fences. It was already late in the afternoon by the time I got there, but just getting out of the sun for a while was enough to energize me. I was drowsy from my antihistamines, something I kept chewing like candy to deal with my dust allergy. Did you know those things are basically sleeping pills? Yawning, I got to the storage space. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. I was the only one there as I closed and locked the door behind me, turning on the lights. The moment the light turned on, something moved. I heard things getting knocked over and clattering to the floor as something crashed into the light overhead, breaking the glass and turning the room dark. My pulse exploded as I pressed my back against the door, fumbling for the lock. "I'm calling the police! You're not supposed to be here! I'm calling the—" I got the door open. As light flooded back into the room, I realized how quiet it was. I pulled up my phone, ready to call for help. As a couple of seconds stretched into a full minute, nothing happened. I started to doubt myself, thinking maybe something had just toppled over or a raccoon was hiding inside. It would be silly to call for help over a wild animal, so I decided to take a closer look. There was nothing in there apart from a strange black mark on the floor. There was this smell of ozone in the air. So I kept the door open to flush it out. The glass from the broken light littered the floor along with a couple of open boxes. It didn't surprise me to see that these were labeled Flamingo. A lot of other labeled boxes in that room were untouched. Looking through the boxes, these seemed mostly left alone. There were tapes, camera equipment, folders, and a box of what looked like turkey basters made of stainless steel. All the boxes had been ripped open and looked through, but nothing had been removed. They were stuffed to the brim with a variety of items. I picked one of the boxes at random, marked Flamingo 1981. It wasn't a large or even heavy box, but it was taped shut. I opened it just to have a look. First thing I saw was a children's drawing in crayon. It was kind of hard to tell what it was supposed to be, but it looked like a portrait. A child, 2 parents, and 2 doctors. On the bottom, a text. "Thanks for the snow globe." I loaded up my car with a couple more boxes and took some pictures of the more expensive items. I was surprised to see medical equipment. This was supposed to be a software company. I returned to that crayon drawing a couple of times, taking a closer look. I couldn't tell if the child was a boy or girl. They didn't have any hair. They also had the outlines of their body drawn in a gray crayon, not a pink one like the parents or the doctors. The reference to a snow globe could be seen in the picture, as one of the doctor characters was holding out one like a present. I decided to call it a night. I checked into a motel and closed the curtains. I'd have to wait to check the videotapes until I got back to the office. I didn't want to plug anything into a motel TV. Instead, I browsed whatever was left. Photos, reports, test results. Once you got past the Flamingo description, there were a couple of names that kept coming back. One of them was Christine or Chrissy. It didn't take a lot of digging to connect her to the crayon drawing. A lot of the reports were transcripts from her discussions with one of the doctors, as well as observations made by staff. Most of them were fairly short descriptions, like a kind of progress report, something that was meant to be added to an ongoing file. Other names were those of doctors and software developers. It seems they were using some kind of program to figure out a solution to a problem that affected Chrissy. Exactly what wasn't clear, but they perfected something they called Compound 5 Mix B. What exactly that entailed wasn't clear. Something about seeds, an echo drive, and synthetic nutrition. There was a whole section written about the physical effects of consuming antifreeze related to this. But what really stood out to me were the observations about Chrissy. She'd been part of Flamingo since the 1970s, just after the founding of the company. Some of the observations about her were absurd. Day 465. Still unable to enter REM sleep. Day 476. Confirmed independent eye movement and dual cognition. Cross report 8. Day 877. Procedural breach found in parking lot? Question mark. Day 1022. Tongue atrophy. The reports hinted at this girl in need of medical attention, but it wasn't clear as to why. They were working on some kind of solution and had been for a long time. Whatever it was, it resulted in some kind of compound that they had been producing until recently. Something that, even when written out, didn't make sense to me. What the hell is a Helianthus cerulea anyway? It was almost 1 a.m. when I turned off my lights and closed all the boxes. I crawled into bed, barely keeping my eyes open. I've never liked sleeping in unfamiliar places. There's always noise that you're not used to. Luckily, I was out like a light the moment my face hit the pillow. In the morning, as I put on my jeans, I turned my head. My alarm didn't go off. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, only to see that the boxes I'd checked were wide open. I'm sure I closed them. The boxes had a lot of old media, like cassettes and VHS tapes, but there were a couple of CDs that seemed a bit more recent. My car stereo was pretty old school, so I tried to put something on to listen to on the way back. It was going to be a long drive, and I figured I might as well get acquainted with the material. Most of the CDs didn't work, or had text files rather than audio, but a couple of them included what sounded like recorded conversations. They all started the same, reciting the date and the name of present staff members. Same names over and over. They didn't mention who they were talking to, but I had a sneaking suspicion. One of the recordings went something like this. Are you still experiencing issues with your vocal cords? There was a murmur in the background, then a clicking noise. I see. No effect from the inhaled sulfur? 2 clicks. Sorry to hear that. Any other recent issues you've experienced in your new environment? There was 1 click. The person in the recording can be heard shuffling around with some equipment, only to spell out letters. A couple of things were brought to attention, such as food, tired, and finally broke. That seemed to get the interviewer's attention. Broke? What broke? They spelled out the word globe. We'll get you an extra one after your next session. How's that? 1 click. Flamingo seemed to be the collected name for all things related to Chrissy. Even later entries confirmed she was still around, alive, and active. Born in 1976, she'd come a long way from the Crayola drawing she made in 1981. They still spoke about her like she was a child, promising toys and gadgets in exchange for cooperation and tests. They never spelled anything out completely. All I learned about Chrissy came from context. The word flamingo, for example, it seemed to come from some kind of digestion issue, keeping her from absorbing the kind of nutrients and vitamins a person needs to live. From the day she was born, she was given this compound 5 mix B as a substitute. Whatever it was, it kept her alive. She'd be dead without it. They would ask her really strange questions like how well she could see with her eyes closed, or if she could open doors without using her hands. Or, in this one instance, if she was still experiencing growing pains in her arms and legs. She gave 1 click for yes. They seemed to have a good relationship. They'd keep a good tone and even joke around. They sometimes talked about dosage and treatment, but it always had this tune of something pleasant. Almost like looking forward to a meal or a spa day. It was something to be excited about. And at the end of every session, they'd give her a snow globe, seemingly for no reason. I think she just liked them. She wanted one from each state. I came back to the office late in the afternoon. Most of the others had already gone home. I got an email about Don coming back to work in the morning, and we needed to get him up to date on our progress. I had to do some overtime to write up a summary, or I'd have him tailing me like a lost puppy all week. I kept the lights on and barricaded myself in my makeshift box fort. Apart from the fluorescent lights, it was eerily quiet. I put the radio on just to have some noise in the air. I turned on my desk light and organized my papers, firing up my work computer as I settled in for a long night. I didn't mind. It was paid overtime. I checked out a couple of CDs that I couldn't get to work in the car. More notes, audio snippets, records, and measurements. They never exclusively spelled out what they were measuring, but some of the numbers stood out. 380.2 pounds, 7 feet 9 inches, 78.8 degrees Fahrenheit, too dense to swim. It was about 8 p.m. when I got up to have a coffee. I had my headphones on, listening to an audio recording as the machine sputtered. They were listing things they'd found in Chrissy's room that hadn't been there during their last checkup. For example, she'd gotten a hold of live piranhas which she kept in an aquarium. They were discussing how the hell she got them to begin with. As I took a sip of coffee, I thought I heard something. Removing my headphones, I listened. I could hear the radio in the other room, but that was it. I called out, "Hello?" There was no response. Thinking I was getting paranoid, I silently crept back to my workstation. There was nothing there, but I could have sworn I'd heard something. I lowered the volume on the radio and turned off my headphones, trying to pinpoint the noise I'd heard. It was strange enough just being there after hours. The place was usually littered with people talking over one another or tapping away at their keyboards. Now it was just me. Just to be sure, I double-checked the lock on the front door. Getting back to my desk, I figured I'd ought to move the boxes a little. Right now, I was literally boxed off and I couldn't see anything. Something could be standing right outside the door without me knowing. But as I moved the boxes a little, I got this chill down my neck. I kept thinking about that morning in the motel. I was sure I'd closed those boxes the night before. Something wasn't right. I got back behind my desk and sat down. The moment I touched my keyboard, I heard a noise. The front door that I locked was slowly opening. I was about to look who it was, but something didn't feel right. It wasn't so much the door opening, but the way it had opened. There was always that familiar click when you slot the key into it. I hadn't heard that. I suppressed my instinct to call out and instead pulled my feet up off the floor, staying behind the boxes as still as I possibly could. Whoever came in hadn't seen me yet. The steps weren't even. I could hear naked skin slap against the stone floor as someone limped inside. I heard some items getting knocked off desks as whatever was on the other side stumbled through the room. It made this awkward gulping noise like someone cold starting an engine. Finally it coughed and the lights went out. There was this cool wave of air rushing over me, sending the hairs on my neck straight up. I watched as the box at the top of my would-be fort was effortlessly picked up. The box weighed at least 45 pounds, but it was taken down like it was nothing. I was so quiet I forgot to breathe. I could see outlines in the dark. There was this shadow on the floor showing something tall and gangly. Every now and then it would make that uncomfortable gulping noise, then proceeded to open in another box. It felt like hours, but it was probably just a couple of minutes. It was fast, as if looking for something very specific. It didn't stop to read labels or reports. Then I got a text message. I think it was just Dawn checking if I had anything to send him up to prep for the meeting the next morning, but I'd forgotten to put my phone on mute. This one loud ding echoed through the room, and I heard whatever was on the other side react accordingly. It was such a sudden noise, and it was surprised. It stepped back, getting its foot snagged in one corner of the power cables. It pulled back too hard and dragged along my computer screen and keyboard, knocking over the box fort as it went. About a dozen boxes collapsed to the floor. I was quick on my feet. The moment it all came down, I hid under my desk. I pressed my face against the ground. There was a small space between the desk and the tiled floor, giving me almost a full inch to view what was on the other side. I didn't see much. It was dark, and the only light I got were from the light posts outside. But I did get a clear view of this tall silhouette, almost like a stick figure. A far too small head for a far too long neck. No hair. Long arms with a strange number of fingers. I couldn't see it breathing. It was completely still. It raised an arm and I could see it shaking. It poked at one of the empty boxes, then looked closer at the one that had tipped over. It picked up something small and held it up, turning it over just inches from its face. Then something happened. Something flipped like a switch. The radio burst into static like the frequency shuffled on its own. The kitchen light came on and instantly popped. A flash of light revealed something gray with leather-like skin. I could hear the microwave running as I saw the shoulders on this thing rise and fall over and over. It dropped whatever it held and tore the boxes apart. Years of documentation and reports thrown to the wind as it flailed its arms around. It stomped down so hard that one of the boxes popped like a balloon, spilling out folders and employee onboarding handbooks. It put one of its legs on top of a desk and pressed down like a vice, breaking the cheap wooden furniture like a snapping twig. And as it raged and threw its weight around, sending boxes and desk lamps and screens flying across the room, it accidentally tipped over my desk, revealing me. And it stopped. Now, I can't tell what I was looking at. Not exactly. I don't recall seeing any eyes or a mouth, but there was something strange about the space where a face ought to have been. I couldn't see ears or a chin or a nose, but there was movement. 100 little movements. Little things twisting and turning in the dark. A strange circular motion, a hole. I don't know why I figured it would attack me. Some animals stopped moving when faced with a predator, as moving might trigger an instinct to chase. That's what it felt like to me. I was curled up on the floor looking up at something I didn't understand. So when it reached for me, I was ready. I ducked down, feeling two of its fingers brush against the top of my head as I headed for the break room at full sprint. The radio was going haywire. It had gone from playing a shock jockey to police scanners to static. There was a blip coming from the fridge as the electronics kept failing. I could see a light outside blinking through one of the windows, and I could hear a car alarm go off in the parking lot. The emergency exit sign flickered as I ran towards it. Just as I was about to reach the handle, I took a hard right towards the bathroom. As I did, something slammed into the door behind me. I heard the hinges snap as the door flung open, triggering a deafening alarm. I rushed into a bathroom stall, closed the door, and locked it. I covered my ears and curled up on the toilet, keeping my feet off the floor. Seconds later, I see the latch on the door move up and to the right, and the bathroom door swung open effortlessly. It's just standing there, shielded by the dark. The crescendo of failing electronics reaches higher and higher. It tilts its head slightly to the right, and suddenly it's all quiet. No alarms, nothing. It looks at me. It doesn't move a muscle. It's staring me down as if looking for something in me. I'm plastered against the back of the stall, trying to make myself as small as possible, my head growing faint from lack of oxygen. I can't breathe, can't think. Without a sound, an arm reaches for me, not menacingly but determined. I say the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know why. Chrissy, don't. The arm stops. I don't have anything. I don't have what you're looking for. The arm falls down to its side, long enough to scrape the floor. It makes a clicking noise once, searching my face for the hint of a lie. I take rapid, shallow breaths. It turns its head to the left, relaxing its shoulders. Then it turns around and leaves. I watch as it walks out the back door. The moment it passes the threshold, the whole building comes alive. Alarms, radios, microwave, fridge, and every light came back in a wave of impressions that punched my senses dead. I blink as my eyes tear up and I look outside. But there's nothing there. It's just gone with a faint smell of ozone. I called the police and my boss. The security cameras failed to capture anything. Most of the boxes that had been knocked over were fine, and even the reports seemed to be salvageable. There were only a couple of items that had been broken. A couple of empty test tubes with aged yellow labels and what looks like a snow globe. Nothing fancy. Just a little souvenir thing with a "Don't Mess with Texas" label. Just bad luck, I suppose. It took us a few days before we got back to the office, leaving me some time to go through the last of the reports. It seemed that the last of the Compound 5 mixes had been delivered months ago, and that there were no more scheduled deliveries. If this was something Chrissy needed, she was running out and fast. I tried checking a couple of VHS tapes, but they'd been demagnetized. But more so, I found something I'd been looking for. A shipping address. I didn't go alone. Not only did I bring Dawn, but we brought the police. It was company property, after all. The place was registered as part of an industrial warehouse, but it was sectioned off with layers of fences and barbed wire. All the locks were long since rusted shut, so we had to cut them open. We followed 2 flights of stairs downward, leading to what looked like an abandoned bomb shelter. It took a lot of effort, but we got the door open. No one had touched it for ages. The entire room was cylinder-shaped with a drain in the floor. There were no lights. We checked the walls with flashlights, sweeping over empty shelves and open drawers. Someone had been there recently, and they'd cleared the place out. I could tell the place had been packed. There were handwritten labels taped to the walls. Some of them were simple enough. Labels for pictures, clothes, and tools. Then a label for snow globes. Every single state labeled, but the shelves were empty. Someone had taken everything and just left. Don took a closer look, sweeping over the labels with his flashlight. "It's missing Texas. How about that?" The place was covered in dust, but a couple of spots were left clear. There'd been collections there until recently. On the far end of the wall, there were test tubes and turkey basters. Labels of C5MB meticulously dated, going back at least a decade. It had stopped a couple of months prior. The officers left as soon as the coast was clear. While Don did some long overdue paperwork, I sat in my car and blasted the AC. I thought about that name, Flamingo. The flamingo gets its pink color from the shrimp it eats. It's a result of its diet and environment. Chrissy had never managed to digest the things we take for granted. She grew up on a completely different set of vitamins and minerals, something they'd make up in a lab back in the 70s. Then again, if they hadn't, she probably wouldn't have survived infancy. But what features of ours are inherently human? What is the human equivalent of the flamingo's pink feathers? What had Chrissy sidestepped and what had she gained in turn? I couldn't make sense of it. Instead, I turned on the radio. Maybe the shock jockeys could drown out my thoughts for a bit. There was no music, and all the local channels were reporting the same thing. They'd found the missing 10-year-old girl. They dubbed the rescue an act of vigilante justice. A deceased suspect was found on the premises, apparently killed in a brutal fashion. The girl had been released from a locked basement and reunited with her family. She had initially been taken on her way to show and tell, where she was going to show off a souvenir from a recent trip down south. An unknown vigilante had broken into the house where she was kept. In the one soundbite they got from the girl, she spoke in a Texas accent. When asked to describe her rescuer, she had only this to say: "That thing stole my snow globe." We finished our liquidation of the company and closed another case. Most boxes were filed away or destroyed, throwing decades of documentation down the shredders. I never got a clear view of Chrissy, and there were no answers as to what became of her. There was no recipe for the compound. And maybe she figured it out. I guess she had to, or else she'd have starved to death. When people ask me about my craziest work story, this is the one I want to tell. I don't know what to make of it, and the people with all the real answers are long since gone. It's so much easier to tell stories about creepy old men than trying to explain the flamingo. But I can honestly say I think about it every day. I can't help but wonder, if we are stripped of the building blocks that make us what we are meant to be, what remains? Hey everybody, Kevin here from Nightmares Nightly. If you made it this far, I want to thank you all for listening. I did this in the last video, and I'm going to do it in the next few videos for a little while, but I'm going to put a little outro in here to let y'all know that I'll be live streaming every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live streaming, live reading, and doing big projects that I have in the works. Right now, we're working on a 4-hour corrections officer with a strange list of rules on a tribal reservation land. We're an hour into that, and we will begin picking up where we left off. And if you missed last week, I'll be sure I'll sum everything up that we missed, so you won't be too lost. I'd love to see you all there, and it's a spot to get a live reading done and ask me anything you want, and we can all hang out and chill. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody. Log user Ethan Oplin, Lieutenant of Star Post Paradius. Entry begins. 48 hours. It has been 48 hours since the end. 48 hours since devastation and fire. Since we aboard Star Post Paradius became the home of the last known humans. We had only realized something was going wrong when the artificial gravity shut down. There had been no alert of a system failure, which meant that the only possible explanation was the failsafe. In the event of a cataclysmic event on Earth, or the destruction of the broadcast facility within Planetside Expedition Command, the station's non-critical systems would shut down or cycle to reduce power to aid in the survival of the crew. Artificial gravity fell under non-critical. Unless the alert system not engaging was part of the system failure, and not the failsafe at all. Either way, it wasn't good. I'd been the closest to the command center, so I pulled my way into the room, letting momentum carry me to the primary console. Gripping a handhold, I reached out to engage the main screen. I linked to an orbital surveillance probe, trying to get a view of Earth. I remember my heart plummeting at what I saw. My own dread had drowned out the shouts and cries of horror from the others entering from the other passages. Hellfire. Flashes of light tearing open the clouds and scorching the surface. Nukes. Nuclear warheads detonating across the planet. This had to be a prank being transmitted from Planetside Command. The Star Post commanding officer, Theodore, was first to reach the communications equipment. Expedition Command, this is Star Post Paradius, respond. Static. Expedition Command, this is Mission Commander Theodore Armstrong of Star Post Paradius. Waypoint for Lunar Colony Project Alpha, respond. More static is all that came through. We were watching the annihilation of mankind. The loss of our world. And we were powerless to stop it. Each minute that dragged on brought another burning blast that marred the once shining visage of our little blue marble. I gripped the handhold tighter, as if it would anchor me to reality as long as I held on. No, this isn't happening, a voice muttered from the entryway. Ensign Hetwing. He'd been with us a few months, eager to make himself useful. I and another crewman, Josiah, had surmised he was trying to earn himself a spot on the lunar colony. The colony that could have been. Where was Josiah? Floating overhead near the ceiling of the room and gritting his teeth? It's happening. Hetwing was already hyperventilating. But my family, my dog, all my things back on Earth. No. He thrashed and kicked at the open air around him in a bid to turn himself around. When a hand found purchase, he yanked himself down the corridor. It took us several seconds, in retrospect, several seconds too long, to realize what he was doing. Kicking off nearby surfaces as safely as we could, we gave chase. A chase that looked ridiculous from an outside perspective, I'd wager. As we began to close in on him, he found Hetwing at an airlock. He was curling his fingers over the emergency release. If he pulled that, the airlock wouldn't close the inner bulkhead first. It wouldn't depressurize the chamber. He would be opening the station to the vacuum of space, to cold, horrific death. Josiah was closer, but I was the one to speak. I opened my mouth, but only got out 2 words. "Hetwing, no!" And the lever came down. I remember his face. That single instant of realization in his eyes as he realized what he'd done. That microsecond of regret, then horror, before the exterior hatch's emergency explosives popped the clamps away and the atmosphere of the station immediately spewed out into space. Hetwing and that hatch were gone before we could even blink. And we were about to follow. Thank God the emergency system still worked. A backup interior bulkhead slammed down, and most of us were able to grab something or fumble with handholds just enough to slow it to a safe drift through the room. But not Josiah. Josiah had too much momentum. He'd been halfway into the chamber when the bulkhead came down. He'd been feet first, and the swift descending metal cleaved through his waist. He was dead in seconds. Most of us wouldn't have processed it before he was dead a full minute. In his last moment, Josiah's eyes met mine. I saw a final flicker of fearful realization before he was truly gone. The moments after that had become a blur. I couldn't recall them if I tried. Truth be told, I'd rather prefer not to think about it. But I would always see Josiah and Hetwing. Their faces. Their haunting faces, their final gaze. It seared into my memory. It's been 48 hours. 2 Earth days interspersed with restless sleep tainted by nightmares of that chaotic moment and the forming hellscape of our homeworld that had caused it. Theodore has me monitoring the communications equipment today. He and the other survivors are doing inventory. Orville is checking our medical supplies. Merrick is doing rounds to tally the rations. And old man Xavier is helping the commander with everything else. I just have to sit here and listen in case some poor bastard survived Armageddon. It's boring. Boring enough for imaginations to run wild. I swear I can almost hear Josiah's voice on the comm line. Entry ends. Cycling to next entry. I'd always be thankful for whoever decided that Starpost Paradies needed a simulated day and night cycle. Without that, I think that the only thing which would have reminded me that I needed to sleep would have been the commander himself. It has now been 6 days since nuclear devastation claimed the surface of Earth and left us stranded between the planet and its moon. I've been fortunate enough to be stuck with communication duty. As repetitive as it is to send message after message to Earth, knowing that there is little to no hope of ever getting a reply, it's leagues above digging through zero-gravity storage to maintain inventory logs. I'd also sooner be handcuffed to this console for the rest of my life before I volunteered to suit up and crawl along the exterior for system maintenance. Why would I sign on for a space mission if the idea of being in a spacesuit filled me with so much dread? Well, it wasn't the spacesuit idea. It wasn't the idea of having only a tether line anchoring me to the station. No. What scared me was knowing that if something went wrong, that there was nobody left who could be deployed to rescue me. I cued the main line again, hearing the faint hum of static. This is Lieutenant Oplin of Starpost Paradies. Again, calling out to anyone who can receive this signal. Please respond. Leaning back in my chair, I once more began the grueling task of waiting for nothing. Deciding that I didn't actually need to be in the chair, I stood and wandered that cozy corner of the command room. I approached one of the security consoles and began flicking through the exterior cameras. Maybe I could get a head start on identifying any problem areas for those given the task of stepping outside. Cameras watching over hand grips, stabilizing thrusters, the few remaining airlocks, now 3 from what was once 4, after that damn fool Hetwing had his breakdown that resulted in the deaths of him and Josiah. The only upside to it that any of us could find, the most minuscule bit of solace in, was that we now had 2 less people drawing from the life support. Foolish, foolish Hetwing, who had just drifted by the camera focused on the solar panels of Section C. I paused, damn near freezing where I stood. That was impossible. There was absolutely no way he could have circled around to pass the station. I isolated that camera, cycling the footage back 10 seconds and playing it again. Nothing. Just the solar panels in the viewport nearest the camera that gave a peek into the botany labs within that section. Not a single sign that the vacuum-ravaged corpse of our late crewman had spontaneously manifested on camera. Must have been a trick of grief. A lack of sleep? I didn't have long to think about it before I heard Theodore's voice. "Getting bored?" he asked. I swung my head around, and he could clearly see the panic on my face because his expression soured instantly. "The hell is wrong with you?" he asked. I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. There was no evidence, and it couldn't have been real. There was no point in recounting a subconscious daydream as fact. Nothing. Just zoned out and my imagination played a trick. I waved a hand. Made me a bit jumpy. Jumpy was an understatement. I hadn't felt my stomach twist like that in a few days. He narrowed his eyes but asked no more questions. "Switch the feeds over to Section D. Xavier is coming back from inspecting the exterior access panels." Section D, the medical section. We rarely ever used it. Nobody had so much as a strange shoulder since our deployment to the station. With a nod, I tapped the controls until the angled view of Section D was on the big screen. There was the bulky outline of the environmental suit that contained the eldest of our crew. Xavier had been part of the whole colony on the moon thing since before Star Post Paradies had been fully completed. Some say it had been his convictions and his presence alone that kept everything going. He was sliding an access panel open with the awkward movements that were all his suit would allow. The things were clumsy, but it was a small price to pay for vacuum protection. They were built to withstand the vacuum of space, minor shrapnel damage, electricity, and maybe even raging infernos. Normally, we would have had the suits inspected and damn near turned inside out every week. But their last day of inspection had been the day the Earth died. Since then, it had been one of the last things on our minds. Even now, that thought stayed in the back of my mind. No sense of urgency rushing it to the forefront. We'd wind up regretting that. I reach out and press the button to link to his suit's comlink. "Xavier, it's Ethan. How's it going?" "Last panel, Lieutenant," Xavier replied, delicately using one of the tools on his belt to temporarily shut off the magnetic seals holding the panel in place. He took it and allowed it to attach to the small magnet resting on the outer thigh of the suit. It was to ensure that the panel didn't just go flying off into nothing forever. "Just gotta make sure this power junction isn't in danger of giving out on us. Wouldn't want things to go dark in there, would we?" I managed to chuckle. Can't get much darker than the mood, right? The joke felt hollow. I wasn't even sure why I'd said it. Even if I truly felt that humor could ease the situation, I couldn't think of any possible joke that would alleviate our doomed struggle to delay what would inevitably come to pass. Xavier grunted. "You'd be surprised just how fucking shitty things can get even when it looks worse. Trust me on that. It can always get better. And it can always get worse." He was cut off as his hand made contact with the conduit. Several things happened in that moment. We caught a microsecond of his body convulsing backwards, the camera watching him cut to static, and an alert of a momentary power surge pinged from an operations console. "Xavier!" I shouted into the microphone. Theodore hurled himself through the room, limbs out to catch himself so he'd not go sailing past the security controls. He mashed several buttons, finally managing to restore the feed. Xavier was drifting away from the exterior hole. The only thing keeping him close was his tether. We couldn't get his comm link restored. We couldn't get any signal from his suit at all. I pushed myself away from the consoles and towards one of the corridors leading towards airlock 2. There would be a switch near the airlock that would allow us to retract the tether until he was near the airlock and we can pull him inside. Orville was there by the time I arrived, suiting up and preparing to step into the pressure chamber. He met my eyes as I floated towards him. He grimaced. "Commander called me up from the storage bay in Section B. How bad is it?" I shook my head. "No idea. Only know is there's a power surge, lost the feed for a moment, and now we're not getting any signals from his suit at all." Orville's grimace deepened. "Fuck, that's not good. I better get out there. Hit the lever." With that, he stepped into the chamber and properly sealed the inner bulkhead. Through my panic and worry, I couldn't help but remember the absolute riot act the commander had drilled into us after the incident with the ensign about proper airlock procedure. Of course, everyone knew the proper procedure, but even then, we'd all know that it was the commander's way of processing the deaths of 2 people under his command in the wake of losing our home. I opened the emergency panel near the airlock, before finding the lever for Xavier's tether. Yanking it down, I leaned against the wall, hissing softly when my forehead met cool metal. Minutes passed, maybe more than I thought, before I heard the sound of the pressure chamber. Atmosphere being restored. When it was safe, I watched the hatch open as the others arrived. Orville pushed Xavier in as he began to take his suit off. I grabbed Xavier first, hands frantically searching for releases with Merrick's help. Theodore was moving to aid Orville. With rising frustration, I finally got the seal on the helmet undone. I pull it free and he was dead. Dead before we'd even begun the rescue effort. His face was frozen in pain. The shock must have sent him into cardiac arrest. Shit. Son of a bitch. Merrick pushed himself away from the body, which pushed it into me. I couldn't draw my eyes off of his face. Hollow eyes, which had once held so much wisdom and experience. All of it meant nothing now. None of it saved him from one faulty suit. He was gone. Another body. 3. 3 dead. The last sliver of humanity was whittling away. Theodore was barking orders at us. He was trying to snap us back to reality. I couldn't hear him. Everything was abuzz. Had the damn hallucination been an omen? Ensign Hedwig's visage coming to claim Xavier? No. That was stupid, but maybe it was. Theodore dragged me back to reality by grabbing me with a shout. "Lieutenant!" He shook me. "Get your head together. We need to handle the body and focus on those of us that are still alive." Ever the sensible one, Theodore was. Guess he had to be. Some would say he was cold. Maybe we needed to be cold or realistic, he'd call it. One more body for the morgue. One faulty suit to be dismantled and left for the trash chute. I quickly volunteered to help him dismantle the suit. I couldn't be near Xavier's body anymore. I couldn't look at that face. It was already burned into my memory alongside Hedwig and Josiah. I didn't need any more time at memorizing the wrinkles in his face or that frozen agony in his eyes. We were silent as we took the suit apart, pushing the pieces toward an open, anchored crate. When we finally removed the visor from the helmet and pushed the empty shell towards the crate, I couldn't bear to look. I was worried, stupidly so, that I'd turn and see Xavier's face staring out at me. I instead looked down at the visor. My own visage stared back at me. I felt like if I dared blink, I'd see their faces looking back at me. "Hey," Merrick said with a grunt. "You all right, Oplin?" I jerked up a bit at that, blinking a few times. It's just a lot. Last humans, you know. And we're down 3 people in less than a damn month. It's scary. Merrick shook his head. "You need to focus on your work. Takes your mind off that mortality shit." I stared at him incredulous. Our crewmate just fucking died, and you can just take your mind off of it? Merrick shot me a look. Damn right. Because losing our fucking minds is gonna kill us a lot faster than mourning an old man who was a complete idiot with his suit. I wanted to punch him, smash the visor over his face, but I kept it in and pushed the visor into the crate. Once it was all in, we sealed the crate and made our way out of the room. 4 of us left. 7 down to 4. 7, 4. We lost 3. If that happened again, I'd be alone. But that was stupid. We just needed to be careful, stick to protocols, and we'd be fine. We would all be fine. Nothing wrong with lying to myself a little bit, right? Entry ends. Cycling to next entry. Warning. Entry corrupted. Initiating memory restoration. Restoration complete. Beginning playback. Things haven't been going well. We jettisoned Xavier's remains through one of the intact airlocks, like we did with Josiah 7 days ago. I haven't spoken to Merrick since. I fear he'll be callous to the point I'll want to swing at him. If violence breaks out, there's a chance it'll never stop until we're all dead. Well, I suppose there's no point in lying here. The reason I haven't been speaking to Merrick since we jettisoned Xavier's remains is because shortly after, we got into another argument about what he called the futility of mourning in a disaster situation. I'd shouted at him, called him a heartless piece of shit. He'd called me a pussy who shouldn't have ever been assigned to the hard work they were doing in the first place. It would probably have come to blows if Theodore hadn't stepped in. We don't use the communications console for more than an hour a day anymore. What's the point of extended effort on a venture that'll yield no results? Of course, Theodore's reasoning was that we needed to conserve power, but we all knew the truth. We were alone, and our numbers were already beginning to dwindle. Humanity would be extinct before long. I just knew it. But I kept it to myself. I wasn't going to spend my last days confined to quarters for, well, embracing the inevitable. A man could only lie to himself for so long before that lie stopped being strong enough to push away nightmares of dead colleagues, faces floating in murky darkness as our clammy, blood-stained hands reached for me in my slumber. A slumber that was becoming extremely rare. I couldn't keep my eyes closed for more than a couple hours at a time. It was eating away at me. I could feel it. It didn't help that with each nightmare, they were getting closer to grabbing me and dragging me into that abyss. Now, we couldn't spend all day performing system checks, exterior inspections, and documentations of inventory. This wasn't anything new. We had been graced with plenty of downtime between tasks before the cataclysm, but now, with the grim knowledge and the haunting memories that all but clouded our minds, we dreaded downtime. Today, I was 7 moves deep into a chess game with Orville. The 3 years younger, looked like he had still just turned 18. Hell, Hetwing had looked older than this smug little bastard who was kicking my ass. 7 moves in, and he had already claimed 3 of my pieces in the last 4 moves. Who the hell taught you to play like this? I asked. Orville raised a brow. Taught myself. I looked up the rules, taught myself to play, and then found out I had a real skill for it. His answer carried a tone of disconnect, as if he wasn't even really thinking about the words that left his mouth as he made another move and took yet another one of my pieces. I couldn't make the excuse that my mind just wasn't in it, that I was distracted about all the things we had been forced to endure. The truth is that I just suck at chess. With a grimace, I moved to claim the piece he had just used. His bishop, which had apparently been a sacrifice so that he could move one of his knights to claim that rook? Fucking hell, I didn't even notice. Merrick laughed from across the room. Smug, arrogant prick Merrick. Merrick floated over, looking at the metal board and the magnetic pieces. Good thing you were never a squad leader for troops, Oplin, he mocked, reaching out to jostle my shoulder. The board was disconnected and smashed across that smug asshole's face before he, Orville, or I knew what was happening. I kept swinging, snarling and bashing in his skull as Orville screamed and shouted. Blood everywhere, bone and brains visible. I was killing Merrick. I was... Hey! The snap of fingers brought me back to reality. An intrusive fantasy. It hadn't happened. Merrick hadn't left his seat, and I hadn't pulled the board off its magnetic anchor. But I was glaring at Merrick, and the look on my face was clearly making him uncomfortable. Orville, too, being that he was the one that snapped his fingers. Ethan, hey! You okay? I turned my gaze from Merrick and back to the board. Yeah. I'm okay. Just spaced out. Trying to figure out how to delay losing another round of chess. I attempted a weak joke. Orville was quiet, clearly concerned. Merrick was leaving the room, casting one last dirty look my way. Maybe we need to put the game on hold, Orville suggested. I took a breath and nodded. I need to do the comm check anyway. Next time, Orville, I'll win next time. I gave him a feeble smirk and began floating my way through the corridors to the command center. I wasn't looking forward to when Theodore caught word of my glaring at Merrick that I was going to hurt him. Though, to be fair, I'd wanted to hurt him. To kill him. That wasn't normal. I know that. But so much has happened. So much was lost so quickly. How can anyone not become a little off-kilter after that? I flicked the communication beacon to life with a single switch turn. I begin my hour of pointless repetition, saying the same line into the microphone every 3 minutes. My name, rank, the name of the station, and begging for a response. Response that wasn't going to come. Why were we bothering with this? Why were we bothering with anything? I was musing over this after my 16th repetition when I heard the crackle. Not the static that usually greeted my responses. A momentary, almost imperceptible crackle. I sat up straight, trying to backtrack to whatever frequency I had been on when the crackle came through. I hadn't been keeping track. Damn it! I did my best to narrow it down to bring that crackle back to the speakers. A noise like that couldn't have just happened. It couldn't just be dead noise. Somebody had to have tried to respond. It's the only possible explanation. When the hour mark came, I didn't power down the equipment. I couldn't just shut down a console and there was a chance we had made contact with a survivor. I made one last adjustment, hearing the crackle of noise. And a second later, it was gone. The entire console had just lost power. No, it hadn't lost it. Someone had remotely shut it off from one of the power junctions. I cursed and moved to the security console, pressing firmly down on a button. This is Oplin. Did anyone just use a junction box to cut power to the communications console? The voice that responded sent a fresh wave of anger through me. Merrick here. I shut it down because the hour passed, Lieutenant. It had nothing to do with the fact that the hour had passed. He must have known that I had made contact, so he cut the power. Probably waiting for me to leave so that he could swoop in and take it for himself. Try to make me look out to be incompetent. If your hour is up, Lieutenant, finish up in there and get to something else. Theodore spoke over the intercom. Sir, I just need a few more minutes. I'm sure I heard something. I could hear Theodore audibly scoff. Unless it was a voice, whatever came through was probably a glitch. We're not wasting any more power on the comms than absolutely necessary. Now get doing to something else. That's an order. As they both shut their ends of the line off, I swear I heard Merrick snickering. I needed to find a way to prove I was right. Maybe once they slept, I could restore power to the console and work until I had to sneak back to my bunk. Or maybe I could just restore it now and tune to the frequency. That frequency. I'd been so angry at Merrick that I'd already forgotten the frequency. Shit! I grit my teeth and made my way out of the command center, drifting along passageways until I reached the medbay. I'd do our inventory on supplies here then. It was close enough to the command center that if Merrick tried to sneak over there and steal my finding, I'd hear him. I'd hear him. I occupied myself with opening compartments, checking their contents and confirming it on the primary medical computer. This was normal, up until the 5th compartment. Sedative storage primarily, with a few high-strength pain suppressants. We were supposed to have 20 counts of sedative. We had 17. 3 counts worth is missing. I made the necessary documentation for the log and hit an intercom button on the wall. "Commander Armstrong?" Theodore spoke a moment later. "Lieutenant, what is it this time?" "Can you come down to the medical wing for a second? I have a minor issue," I said softly. I then switched off the intercom before drifting listlessly as I waited. When he finally arrived, he looked agitated. I wasted no time in showing him the log and then the storage compartment itself. "You called me down from helping Orville to calibrate the power grid? For a minor stock inconsistency?" he grumbled behind me. I blinked once, then twice. Was he chewing me out for doing my job? "I'm sorry, sir?" Theodore raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You just said—" "I haven't said anything, Lieutenant. I think you need to cut your duty short and go to bed if you're hearing things. That was probably what happened at the console." He shook his head. "Now get going. That's an order. I'll take it over here." I stared for a moment, but did as I was ordered. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Trying had brought a new nightmare. Until now, they'd been the horrible deaths of my colleagues from an outsider's point of view. Not now, no. This was worse. Moments after my eyes had closed, I was met with the visage of my hands wrapping around the airlock's emergency release. No, not my hands. Hetwing's hands. I was watching Hetwing through his own eyes as my own voice tore through a haze of panic and desperation. Both those hands were moving. I saw everyone. Orville, Josiah, Xavier, Merrick, the commander, and myself. Before space claimed me. The dreamscape alerted instantly, a brief haze of the station around me speeding by as metal sped down towards me, staring into my own eyes. And then it was cold. Cramped and cold. And I could only surmise that I was peering through Xavier's lifeless eyes. Then came hands across the visor of a spacesuit. Muffled yelling accompanied the helmet's hiss as it came free. Merrick screamed and I felt the body jostle before I was once more meeting my own gaze. Then the visions marred and blurred before tearing themselves into an ethereal sea of nothing. Had my mind run itself ragged? It didn't matter. I was finally asleep. I only woke up once in the middle of the night. I'd heard tapping outside my quarters, but when I went to check, there was nobody there. I think I'll try to recapture that fleeting sleep. There's nobody but us four on the station. Merrick was probably just being a prick. I can't let him get to me. In these moments, I wish... Warning. File corruption present. Unable to complete log. Cycling to next log. I've been neglecting making these entries after rereading the last one. Was I really that unraveled already? Am I so easily toppled? It kept me away from this log for 2 months, but I needed to make this one. Especially after what happened yesterday. 2 major events, which have altered our situation for the worse. Commander Theodore Armstrong is dead. This is what happened. It was time for that damnable hour of transmissions. Nothing but static yet again. I wasn't even graced with the softest crackle. We'd likely lost our window to make contact. If it had been somebody, they were most likely dead now, and we were all alone again. I remember mentally cursing Merrick's name before the security console began issuing a shrill, repeating beep. Leaving the communication console running, I floated over to the security controls and checked for the cause. A transport ship. One of the automated craft from Earth. When the Star Post was under construction, those involved with the project decided that automation would save time, manpower, resource, you name it. A network of satellites and automated supply docks orbited closer to the planet. Whenever we ran inventory, we would document how long our current supplies would last and would then transmit a supply request to that network. Supplies would then come up from Earth, be loaded by automatons onto the transports, and one would be sent our way. Our last request had been months ago, the day before Earth died. Well, this would extend our estimated survival time. I tapped the intercom. "Commander, seems we have an incoming cargo ship." Theodore didn't reply for a minute. When he did, it was clear he was surprised. "Forgot we called for that. I'm going to the docking bay in Section A, and I'll send Merrick and Orville to help you run the docking protocols from there." I nodded. "Got it, Commander." As I switched the connection off, I realized I probably wasn't as excited about this arrival as I should have been. I didn't know what I felt. Well, not at first. The strange feeling, or lack thereof, was quickly replaced by a growing concern when I checked the radar. That transport was approaching way too fast, and its course was off. It was going to crash into Section A. Shit! Orville was entering at that moment. "Commander said something about a ship coming in?" he asked. I turned to him. "Ping the transport, tell it to slow down and change course. It's going to plow through Section A if we don't stop it." Orville paled, but thankfully quickly composed himself and made his way over to the communications console. "Incoming craft, your course and speed are incorrect. Correct your course and decelerate to avoid collision. Comply." The order at the end was hollow. Our orders would process as a request, which the transport would then relay to Earth to command. A command which would never receive the signal. The thought dawned on me, and that growing concern was transformed just like the emptiness before it. Now it was panic. And the panic intensified when the robotic voice of the transport filtered through. "Course correction, request received. Synchronizing with central control. Error. Connection timeout. Error. Connection timeout. Error. Connection timeout. Connection to central control failed. Maintaining course." Dread. Dread sank into every nerve as my shaking fingers hit the intercom. "Commander, the transport's coming in way too fast and off course. It's going to hit Section A." I heard Theodore cursing. "I'm on my way out. I'll hit the emergency seal when I'm back in the central substructure. Keep trying to get that thing to fix its shit." That was when Merrick arrived. "The fuck is going on?" Orville was barking orders, demanding the transport change its course. It kept responding with the same failures. He was frantic, bordering on begging the automated projectile not to collide. This was all Merrick needed to hear. "Is the commander back yet?" "Still in Section A," I replied, watching him on the cameras, eyes flicking to the radar over and over. It was too close. It would hit. The station would be open to vacuum. It would spin itself to devastation. My eyes fell upon the emergency bulkhead controls. I could seal off the entire section. I could give us a chance to halt the spin once it started. A slim chance, but a chance. All I would have to do is seal the bulkhead. Seal the bulkhead and kill Theodore. I don't remember what course of thought led to my decision, but I hit that button hard. The alert of the bulkhead went off a second later. Merrick was the one to speak, his harsh tone snapping Orville out of the loop of pleading he'd sunk into. "What the fuck did you just do?" I clutched the edges of the console. "It saved us. Get ready to correct our spin," I said. "No, fuck you. What the fuck did you just do, you lunatic?" Merrick began to pull himself towards me. I didn't look at him. My attention was drawn instead to one of the security console screens. Theodore had reached the bulkhead. He hammered it, looking to the camera and screaming at me to open the damn thing. He'd made it. There had been time. And as that realization set in, all hell broke loose. The noise of metal shredding, though muffled by the station itself, nearly deafened us as everything around us went spinning. My hands scrambled and feet kicked. Orville screamed and Merrick howled curses. The station was in a death spiral. The momentum would tear it apart. We were going to die. Hetwing, Josiah, Xavier, Theodore. We'd join them. I finally caught something. A console. We could fix this. We had to stop it. I tried to pull myself closer with a grunt. The retros! I screamed over the alarms blaring in our ears. Orville seemed to have heard, given he was desperately trying to get into a chair as the world tore itself apart around us. Merrick was still tumbling. As we tried to fire off the boosters, I heard Orville shout in pain. "Merrick, you left those fucking pens out!" he shouted. Had it been any other situation, I'd have laughed at that. Not right now. Right now, I was focusing on not dying. It felt impossibly too long before Paradies finally slowed its spin. We all clung to our handholds as our knuckles turned white. Orville was the first to weakly speak. We survived? We actually survived that?" "Most of us did," Merrick said, his tone heavy with accusation. "Somebody let the commander die." I felt anger boil anew under my skin. I didn't know he had time. I was thinking of the group. Half true. I didn't know he had time. But when it came to thinking of survival, I'd only thought of Hetwing and Josiah and sharing one of their fates. Orville and Merrick had not been on my mind at all, beyond what use they would have been to aid in stabilizing the station. But I wasn't going to admit that. He would take that and use it to justify his claim. I hated him. I hated Merrick so deeply. Maybe I'd always hated him and just hadn't realized it until the day Xavier died. "Bullshit. You're just a damn lunatic who's waiting for ways to kill people. I saw the way you looked at me in the lounge," Merrick snapped. "Guys," Orville spoke up. I clenched a fist, Orville's word falling on a deaf ear. "Maybe I just looked at you the way somebody looks at a person they can't stand because he's a prick." "Guys!" Orville screamed, snapping our attention away from one another as he rested a hand on one of the monitors. "Look!" We both made our way over, and I felt ice across my skin as I observed the display. Starpost Paradies had been knocked out of orbit. We were slowly going to drift further and further away from Earth until the open void of space claimed us. And we'd used up too much fuel correcting the spin. We were going to float away, and nobody was going to come save us. These logs, our inventory checks, nothing matters anymore. We're dead men floating. We're going to die. We are going to die. Entry ends. Cycling the next entry. It's been 3 months. 3 entire months. When it had whittled down to 3 of us, rationing out the rest of our supplies became a lot easier. We could probably last until an entire year passed. The realization that we were drifting off into empty space didn't really bother us after the first few days. Sure, knowing you were about to drift away from home is terrifying, but once you start reminding yourself that the home you're thinking of doesn't really exist beyond scorched ruins, it becomes a lot easier to process. Hadn't stopped the nightmares, though. The faces of the dead. The tapping. My mind replaying Theodore's screams, and even seeing the lost souls when I turned corners for only a moment. I'd even had a few more hallucinatory murder fantasies between then and now. And on that note, I think I should stop stalling and get to the reason I'm making this log entry after so much time has passed. I phrased it as, when it had, instead of since it had, because it's not the 3 of us anymore. 4 hours ago, I was with Merrick and Orville in the command center. We had taken to spending most of our time there, looking over reports and seeing where we could go before heading outside to do even the smallest amount of damage control. "This would be easier with the commander here to decide where it would be best to work," Merrick remarked coldly. "If you have something to say, Merrick." I shouldn't have taken the bait. But when you hate somebody, it doesn't take a lot to get under your skin. Then fucking say it. Orville sighed. Not again. If you'd been a sane person and waited for the commander, he'd still be alive. Merrick snarled at me, lips bared in a hateful sneer. You've been unhinged since this began. I took a deep breath, clenching a fist. I wasn't unhinged. Sleep deprivation did not equal instability. I was fine. I am fine. I am not unhinged. I thought we didn't have time, so I made a split second. He cut me off. Don't give me that. You probably just wanted to see what it would be like when a man died because of you. He was sneering now, and I could have sworn there was a glint in his eye, as if trying to antagonize me was a joy for him. Though a voice in the back of my head was shouting at me to reel myself in. I wanted him dead. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to silence that judgmental, mocking voice of his. We've been isolated, stuck together, and I couldn't tolerate it one moment longer. I turned fully to him. You do not know me, Merrick, so stop acting like you do before you regret it, I warned him. I didn't know what I meant by that. Would I hurt him? Would I kill him? He pushed towards me, arms out. Do something, Oplin. Fucking do something. Prove me right. I stared him down. I could dig my thumbs into his eyes, wrap my fingers around his throat. The urge was there. It would be so easy to kill this scumbag who'd been a constant source of torment. I hesitated long enough that Merrick thought I was backing down. He sneered again. That's what I thought. He began to turn away when something flew past my head. I'd only find out later that it had been one of Merrick's loose pens. It had coasted into Orville's personal space and he'd grabbed it, thrown it away from him. Guess our arguing had been getting to him more than he'd shown. It hit Merrick in the back of the head. He grabbed the console closest and spun himself around to lunge at me. Fucking prick, he screamed. He must have thought it was me. Regardless of what he thought, he was attacking me. I had to defend myself. He swung at my head, and I barely got an arm up to defend me. We swung and kicked at each other. With how ferociously he was fighting, it stood to reason he'd been coming undone faster than any of us. Or he just wanted an excuse to hurt me. Either way, I had a feeling he wasn't going to stop until he killed me. A fist met my jaw and I spun. He gave me a kick to the back and I found myself hitting a console. Hey, enough! Orville tried to get involved, only to receive an elbow to the face from Merrick, who immediately returned to coming after me. He wasn't going to stop. I had to stop him. I needed to stop him. I managed to move out of the way of his next swing before managing to get my arms around his head. The headlock did little to subdue his shouts of anger and his flailing limbs. I'll fucking kill you, Oplin, you sadistic sack of shit. A powder keg is ruptured. There wasn't any going back, no calming him down, none of that. As we tumbled, I finally got a proper position of leverage. I tightened my hold and with one firm shift. The snap was loud in the confined space. His body fell limp instantly. I'd killed him. I killed Merrick. My ears rang and I just stared down at his lifeless face. Another face of death that would haunt my nightmares. I had to, I muttered. Orville was staring at me. I had to. I don't apologize. I don't. I killed him because I had to. I'd do it again. It's just Orville and me now, drifting into nothing. At least we're safe. Safe. Orville won't look at me. Won't talk to me. His eye is swollen from Merrick's elbow, but he isn't calling me a murderer, blaming me for any deaths or any of the things Merrick had been doing. I think we're going to be able to figure out some way past this and keep working together. Entry ends. Cycling to next entry. Unable to locate. Retrying. Unable to locate. Retrying. Unable to... Entry located. Recompiling. 6 months. 6 months. I haven't made an entry in 6 months, and things have gotten worse. They're back for us. And that's not the worst of it. The ones from beyond got Orville and almost got me. I've been taken to slowly creeping around corners, peeking to make sure I'm not running into the dead. Is it my mind? Or something more? Like what got Orville? It might still be out there, hiding from the cameras. It learned after the first time. It started 2 weeks after we used one of the airlocks to get rid of that bastard Merrick. I've been cleaning one of the tables in the lounge room. It hadn't been visibly dirty. It wasn't even really on the rotation of the duties. I just needed something to do. I had just finished and was about to move on to the next table. The table where Theodore's frozen body sat, face stuck in an angry scream. None of his body was moving but his eyes, his bloodshot, near-burst eyes. They were trained on me. I had recoiled and screamed, trying to get away. I got halfway across the room, turning to see if it was following, but it was gone. Gone? How the hell was that possible? Was I crazy? No. I was fine. I'm not losing my mind. I was not crazy. That would mean Merrick was right. I would not let him be right. As time went on, I'd see the others too. Standing in corridors, not hovering, standing, as if the lack of gravity meant nothing to them. They would stare at me, no movement, no words, just their eyes tracking me. Josiah would stand over my shoulder when I used any of the consoles in the command center. Hatwing hung around the medbay. Xavier began photobombing the external cameras. Merrick was in my fucking room. His face was blank, but his eyes held rage and hatred. I had taken to bringing a small anchor belt to hook myself to certain areas so I could sleep anywhere but my room. I refused to look at his stupid face. I refused to meet the eyes that judged me for taking an action that he forced me to take. I'd learned to keep an eye out at the 4-month mark, how to navigate around them and ignore the accusatory stares. But what came 2 nights ago? It threw every plan to the void. I woke up in the middle of a fitful slumber, anchored near a viewport. I had a few moments to clear my mind, blinked the sleep away, and thankfully was not confronted by any of my dead crewmates. I had a reprieve that was shattered the moment I looked out the viewport. A tendril. A thin, coiling tendril. Some drifting cosmic horror had found us. I had to warn Orville. I unhooked the anchor and began clamoring around the station, screaming Orville's name. No answer. It got him. It must have lured him outside. I was alone. It killed him and it was going to kill me. I had to reach the control room. Maybe the external robotic arms could give me a few more moments of survival. I reached the control room, sweating and breathing hard as I scrambled weightless and frantic until I found the console. My hands were shaking as I called up the first of the 6 arms. It had been 8 before the transport had cleaved through Section A. There was nothing on the camera nestled inside a port on the end of the arm. Cursing, I flicked over until I found something. The tendril. Its end branching out into a monstrous extremity that spotted one large eye and disjointed sluggish digits. It was peering around the edge of the torn hole where Section A had once been attached to the main node. It was trying to find a weakness. It was trying to get inside. I took control of the mechanical arm and maneuvered it in. Noise was coming in over the comms. That console on the far side of the room? I wasn't listening. I refused to be tricked or taunted. I'll wound this thing or kill it, whichever I can manage. The arm's clamps clenched down on the tendril. I yanked and spun the arm, aggressively manipulating the controls. The noise over the comm console grew louder, much louder. It was trying to get in my head. No, not today. Just die already, I screamed, before giving a harsh pull of the controls. The arm spun abruptly and the tendril ripped, the extremity flailing as it was sent spinning away. Again, the communications noise grew ever louder. Relishing my victory, I pushed my way across the room and practically punched the switch to turn the console off. Its last desperate attempt to assault my mind in its death throes was foiled. I cheered. I had beat a cosmic horror. I had avenged Orville. Or so I thought. It was then that I heard an alert from one of the maintenance consoles. At first, I thought it was something the being had done, that it had managed to damage the station before I chucked it away. My heart still hasn't pulled itself out of the chasm it sank into when I read the notification on the console screen. Tether 5 was damaged. The damage had been detected 45 seconds ago. Reality slammed into me as hard as the transport had slammed into us so long ago now. That hadn't been an alien tendril. That hadn't been some monstrous extremity at the end of it. It had been a tether, keeping Orville attached to the station. And I had just sent him spinning into the abyss. The packs on the suits came with their own small maneuvering thrusters, but they weren't powerful enough to correct the amount of force with which I had thrown him using the station's arm. One moment was all it had taken. One hallucination was all that was needed for me to ensure my solitude and condemn an innocent man to a slow, agonizing death. I couldn't switch the console back on. As much as I wanted to apologize, it wouldn't do him or me any good. I couldn't maneuver the station to go grab him, and he couldn't maneuver back. No, I'm lying. I'm not turning the console back on, but not because it's hopeless, but because I don't want to hear his condemnations of my actions. Or worse, any forgiveness that I should never in a million years expect to receive. I'm all alone now. Alone with the dead. Perhaps Orville will be joining their ranks soon. Entry ends. One log remaining. Decrypting. Decryption complete. Beginning playback. My name is Ethan Oplin. I am a lieutenant. I am an operations officer stationed aboard Star Post Paradius. I am the last surviving member of the station's crew. But I am not the station's only occupant. It has been approximately 37 days past a year since the planet Earth was lost to nuclear Armageddon. I only know this because of the primary computer. Strict rationing of the remaining resources on board has kept me alive, but it will run out soon. I have at least another 2 months. The visitations upon me by my dead crewmates have increased in occurrence and aggression. Reaching towards me, mouths open with teeth bared, eyes full of rage. It took a week after his death, but Orville joined them. I remember the first time. The others have been absent, quiet. No howling screams of hate or accusations of murder. Not even a brief flicker of Merrick's form over my bed. I'd almost thought I was finally waking up from this abominable nightmare, until I felt the fatigue of sleep deprivation, the aching muscles and bones that were sure to atrophy due to no gravity, and saw my unshaven face and dirty uniform in the mirror. It was only when I floated to the corridor that I discovered the source of my reprieve. A spacesuit. Whatever was in it made sure its feet clung to the deck plating. I couldn't move. I stayed there, transfixed. There were tears in the seams from which a black ichor oozed. Its hands lifted toward his helmet. Its seals corroded before my very eyes, and when the helmet began to lift, I heard the noise. The same noise that had assailed me during my hallucinations that resulted in my murder of Orville. Only now, my fractured mind finally filtered the noise into something I could understand. Orville's voice, shrieking and screaming in panic as he pleaded with me to stop, as he begged for his life. The helmet was removed and I saw his face. No, what was left? His jaw was severed at one side, dangling at an angle. Coiled around it was a tendril of muted silver that came from within the suit. Another tendril rested along the side of his head, plunged into his eye socket. His remaining socket was home to the eye of the cosmic beast I'd envisioned. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to cry, to scream. A second later, the specter lunged at me with a scream. I howled in terror and shielded my face with my lens, but nothing came. After that, I would see him every other week, and each time he got more bold, attacking me in the control room, lounge, even my room. As it drew on, even the others got more bold, attacking me themselves. They were closing in because they knew I was getting weaker. 2 weeks ago, I began to move more and more supplies into the command center. I had to contend with the others trying to hurt and stop me, but I was getting it done. While raiding the other crew members' rooms, I came across something. Hidden cases of sedative in Merrick's room. He'd been stealing it. That's why there was less than documented. I'd done the right thing killing him. He hadn't been trustworthy. But that didn't really matter anymore. I finished moving everything I would need to survive until the rations ran out yesterday. It's all here, in the command center. 2 hours ago, I breached the remaining airlocks via the maintenance console, making sure to override failsafes. I sealed off the command center. Now it's the only place with atmosphere and air. I hear them beating on the bulkheads. I see them staring at the only cameras I keep running, positioned outside each sealed entrance to the center. They want to join me. They want me to end my solitude and join them. I won't. I am the last human alive. I have a duty to preserve our species for as long as I can. The communications console keeps beeping. There's garbled crackling coming through. Can't remember whether or not I turned it on. I don't think I should answer it, even if it is real, and it could be my last chance to talk to a survivor. It could also be a trap by the one screaming outside my safe haven, screaming for me to die. I have to stay here. I have to stay alive. My name is Ethan Oplin, and I will not submit to the dead crew of Starpost Paradius. Godspeed. Log filing complete. Warning. Data corruption detected. Multiple system failures in progress. Loss of logs imminent. Beginning probe upload. Probe launched to initiate immediately upon full upload. End. Also, quick message, everybody. I forgot to put this in while recording, so I'm doing it now while touching up the edits. I am going to start live streaming every single Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The live streams will be, if there's any updates to the channel, I might do a little bit of just while people funnel in, get some gaming in there, just while people, come in for the night, because the live stream focus is going to be me narrating live and editing live big projects. So whenever I have a 2, 3, 4 hour story in the works, those will be on the live streams. And I hope to see you all there. I really enjoy reading the stories live, engaging with everybody, answering questions. Getting to know everybody a little bit more on a more personal basis. I really enjoy it. It's been a lot of fun. I've done 3 so far, and I like it a lot. I hope to see you all there, and this will be, as of now, an every Monday night at 7 p.m. EST. I hope to see you all there, and as always, thanks for listening, everybody.